Chapter 859. P.S. Well, everyone seems to have misunderstood. Civet is used to thinking of writing as three parts: the beginning, middle, and end. When he said that it was about to end, he didn't mean that it would end immediately. He only said that it was about to end and that there was still some time to write. In short, don't worry, Civet will definitely fill in the holes before the end. Carrot, carrot. After entering the alchemy laboratory, Tang In discovered that he had the potential to become a prophet. Haha, Alan, it really is you, Big Sister Lena. Tang, Mr. Arthur? You're also here. Haha, what a coincidence. Alan, who had a short beard and had a mature, manly aura, laughed heartily as he walked over. He greeted Tang In and hugged him, patting each other's backs. They were both somewhat excited. After separating, Alan spread his hands and gestured to the tall young woman next to him as he smiled and introduced, "This is Miss Annika. Miss Annika, this is Big Sister Lena, and this is Mr. Arthur. They're my closest relatives." Tang In sized up the young woman called Annika and was slightly taken aback. His first impression of her was that she looked familiar. Of course, this was not an excuse for him to strike up a conversation with her. Tang In quickly discovered the reason for her familiarity and could not help but glance at Lena beside him. Lena and Annika looked at each other, both of them a little surprised because they both found some similarities with each other. Standing together, the two of them were of similar height and had similar facial features. But their temperaments were completely different. Lena was calm and indifferent. This was related to her identity as a master alchemist. Annika was elegant and refined. She should have a good background. After a pause, Tang In and Lena recovered and smiled as they greeted. "Nice to meet you, Miss Annika." She lowered her white lace hat and bowed slightly. She politely returned the greeting. "Mr. Arthur, Miss Lena, nice to meet you." After greeting each other, they didn't chat much. Alan quickly found an excuse to have Annika and Lena chat while he and Tang In walked away. "I'm sorry, sir. I was careless. I didn't expect you to be here when I came." Alan looked a little apologetic. One had to know that Tang In was not in disguise now, which meant that this was the real face of the person wanted by the entire continent. Once exposed, it would undoubtedly bring huge trouble to Tang In, Lena, and Alan himself. "I'm fine." Tang In waved his hand carelessly and grinned self-deprecatingly. "With my ordinary face, I guarantee that she will forget about me after seeing me. You're quite fast. I didn't see you bring anyone the last time we met." He patted Alan's shoulder and gave him a thumbs up. "This Annika is your girlfriend, right?" TSK. She's a noble lady. Good taste." Tang In's eyes were very sharp. With just a glance and observing Annika's elegant and standard manners, he could confirm that she was a noble lady. And if he guessed correctly, she should be a noble lady from the south. Alan didn't deny it and nodded with a smile. Annika's family does have some nobility. I met her by chance at a banquet in a southern city. Sir, you should be able to see that she looks a little similar to Sister Lena, so we chatted for a while. At that time, her family was in some trouble in the business world, so I got to know her." Tang In laughed. "I get it now. The hero saves the beauty, and the beauty marries him. Haha, so you're really here to show off." "Sir, you're joking with me again." Alan shrugged helplessly. Then his expression turned serious, and he said respectfully, "Alan's achievements today are all because I met Sir and Sister Lena. Otherwise, Alan would forever be a poor boy in the slums who dreamed of getting rich. You're my only family in this world. So after meeting Annika, I wanted to find a chance to bring her here to meet you and listen to your opinions." Tang In couldn't help but be stunned when he heard this. His expression was a little complicated. He was gratified by Alan's attitude after achieving success and also proud of his own vision. He patted Alan's shoulder. "Don't say that. Your achievements today are all because of your own hard work. Even without me, you can still succeed. I have no doubts about this." After saying this resolutely, Tang In turned to look at Annika. He suddenly felt very strange, like a father looking at the daughter-in-law his son brought back. He suddenly felt a chill. Seeing Tang In's strange expression, Alan asked nervously. "What's wrong, sir?" "Oh, nothing." Cough, cough. Tang coughed twice and awkwardly rubbed his nose. Only now did he really focus on Annika. It had to be said that looking at Lena and Annika standing together and chatting, Tang really felt like he was looking at two beautiful sisters. It was very pleasing to the eye. Perhaps it was because of this that the two of them had a very harmonious conversation. However, if he ignored these superficial phenomena, Tang still felt a little unnatural from Annika. There was a faint hostility. It wasn't the kind of hostility that would kill you, but the kind of hostility that women would have towards each other. Of course, this degree was very slight. It was hidden under Annika's elegant behavior and was almost undetectable. In fact, it was this kind of elegance that allowed Tang to see some clues. As the saying goes, 3 generations of nobility. The elegant temperament of nobility wasn't innate, but rather, it was formed under the influence of the environment and the accumulation of time. Just like how Tang could see that Annika was a noble lady, Annika should also be able to see that Lena came from an ordinary background. In this way, the scene in front of him was somewhat interesting. Alan's previous introduction had already stated Lena's important position in his heart. Logically speaking, Annika should be trying to curry favor with Lena. Even if it wasn't obvious, it would still be a way to express her attitude. But now, the situation was exactly the opposite. Annika was using her family background to secretly suppress Lena. TSK. Could it be that this is the incompatibility between beautiful women? Tang raised his eyebrows and thought about it. Although he didn't approve of Annika's attitude towards Lena, it was only a small matter. He dismissed it with a smile and didn't take it to heart. He turned around and looked at the nervous Alan. He nodded and praised. "Not bad. She's a good girl. I can see that she cares a lot about you, since she accompanied you all the way to the north. Hee, you're lucky. You can't let her down in the future." "How could I?" Alan was obviously relieved when he heard this. He smiled and said, "If Sir says she's good, then she's really good." Tang rolled his eyes when he heard this. "TSK, what are you talking about? Are you looking for a girlfriend? Or am I looking for a girlfriend?" Alan chuckled and scratched his head in embarrassment. He then looked at Annika, who was chatting happily with Lena. A gentle expression flashed across his face. "Then it's her. Who would have thought?" Shaking his head, Alan sighed emotionally. "I'm just a poor boy from the slums. I can't believe I'm able to marry a noble lady. The world is really unpredictable. You're blatantly showing off." "I can't compare to you, sir." Alan turned to look at Tang with a smile. "I heard from Sister Lena about Sir and Miss Josiah's relationship. Yes, Josiah is both a noble and a magician. Sir, you're the one who's really lucky." Tang grinned when he heard this. "You forgot to mention her identity. She's also the leader of the rebel army." TSK. That's giving me a lot of pressure. She's the leader of the rebel army now, but it's hard to say in the future," Alan said with a teasing tone. "Besides, only you, sir, can enjoy such a wondrous woman. I really admire you when I think about it. If you're free one day, sir, why don't you teach me a thing or two?" They were all men. When it came to this topic, Tang was supposed to agree and brag about it. However, for some reason, Tang suddenly thought of Sylvia and Lan Sha. He suddenly felt a little guilty. He raised his head and laughed. "We'll talk about this in the future. Chapter 860. Everything has its pros and cons. By releasing the Do Chi circulation channel, Tang successfully created a situation where the Northern Warriors and the Temple of Light were at loggerheads with each other. In one fell swoop, the Temple of Light had been dragged into the abyss of the quagmire, unable to extricate itself. But it must be said that the temptation could make people have a strong motivation, but it could also make people greedy. In this world, there are many people who claim to be smart and like to take shortcuts. What's more, most people who could receive a mission from an assassin organization were not honest and well-behaved people. Most of them were ruthless and sinister bounty hunters. After tasting the sweetness, they would no longer think about continuing to obtain the mission reward. Instead, They would calculate how to get the reward in one go. Tangen had naturally expected such a situation. So when he first started to issue missions, he personally took charge and killed a group of people with bad intentions with thunder, quickly establishing a stable foundation for the early assassin organization. Then, Michaud led the members of the Gray Space to secretly move out, running around and constantly nipping at the bud of the conspiracy. But it had to be said that greedy people could never be killed. Even if they could easily smell the danger from various channels, the tempting prospect of profit had long overwhelmed their rationality. Just like the smugglers on the border, they were like carps crossing the river. Their red eyes were only filled with the huge profits after success, completely ignoring the fatal news close at hand. It's okay. It's just that there are a lot of people who want to die. Since they wanted to die, naturally, you would not hesitate to kill them. In such a situation, Tangen's idea was very simple. After listening to Michaud's summary of the current bad situation, he directly waved his hand and said, "Then continue to kill. The more brutal, the better. I don't believe that I can't stop this evil trend." Michaud nodded calmly. "Yes, I'm a professional." There was no need to show off, nor was there a need for slogans. For people who came from the gray space, killing people was a professional, just like farmers weeding, fishermen fishing, and so on. What's more, this was Michaud, Tangen's sharpest knife hidden in the dark. Tangen smiled and did not say much. He just pointed to the cup on the wooden table and waved his hand. "Tea or wine?" Michaud shook his head and stood up. "I'm going out to kill someone." He bowed and left. This was Michaud's style. Now, he was more silent and dangerous than before. It seemed that only by killing, and continuously killing, could he find some sense of existence in this world. However, as long as Tangen was still around, this dangerous killing was still under control. And for the enemy, it was naturally a nightmare of disaster. After Michaud left, the ordinary carriage naturally merged into the road and moved forward. Tangen's true face was not easily exposed, and it was troublesome to disguise himself every time he went out. Therefore, he now enjoyed the treatment of a private carriage. No matter where he went, there were people from the gray space who disguised themselves as coachmen to pick him up and drop him off. What? The garrison cavalry has already been here. But this is our area of jurisdiction. Who will be faster than us? When they passed by the dilapidated tavern, the thick smoke had yet to completely disperse. At this time, the real garrison cavalry had just arrived. But looking at the confused expressions on their faces as they talked to the surrounding witnesses, it was obvious that they wouldn't be able to obtain any valuable clues. "Ha!" Tangen chuckled silently and put down the curtain. He touched his chin and began to think about the current situation. Although he had just said those words, Tangen was very clear that the matter of the Assassin's organization would not end so easily. This was not something that could be stopped by killing a few people. Unless one day the Assassin's organization could grow into a behemoth like the Temple of Light, it would be impossible to dispel the greed in the hearts of the greedy people. Since he could not find a solution himself, naturally he would have to work on the source, but now the source. Tangen rubbed his eyebrows and looked a little confused. "Damn it, what's the point of staying here like a half-dead mangy dog?" These words were undoubtedly scolding the Temple of Light. In fact, up to now, the churches and countless clergy in the north had been damaged by more than half. It was not an exaggeration to say that the foundation of the Temple of Light in the north for thousands of years had collapsed. Retreat was the inevitable choice. Otherwise, they could only watch the casualties continue to increase. However, no one knew what the Divine Palace was thinking. They would rather suffer huge losses at every moment than stay here. They had no intention of retreating. It was obvious that they were not going to leave. It really made people speechless. It was like two heavyweight boxers fighting in a ring. The lightweight boxer used all his strength and finally knocked down the heavyweight boxer. Just as he was about to win, the heavyweight boxer covered his face and curled up. Then, no matter how hard he was beaten, he refused to leave the ring. Although the lightweight boxer kept punching and kicking because he lacked the ability to kill with one blow, he was helpless against this dog-like opponent. Sure enough, once people are shameless, they immediately become invincible in the world. With a long sigh, Tang sighed helplessly. Little did he know that the Temple of Light was even more helpless at this time. They almost burst into tears. Now the North was a quagmire. No matter how many people they mobilized, it was useless. If they had known that a wanted order would lead to such consequences, they would rather break their teeth and swallow their blood directly into their stomachs. Of course, at this time, the Temple of Light would not retreat no matter what. They knew very well that if they retreated, it would mean that the Temple of Light's influence in the North would completely disappear. And if they did not retreat, although the days would be difficult and their reputation would be miserable, as long as they could endure this period, with 1,000 years of foundation, they would still be the king of this vast land. In short, endure it. Tang could naturally think of the Temple of Light's thoughts. Although he was dissatisfied before, he was also prepared for a long battle. But since receiving Josiah's letter, Tang quickly changed his mind. Not leaving? Then when the Gray Coat Army comes out, get ready to get lost. As for now, Tang pursed his lips, still feeling unhappy. He had already boasted to Josiah in the letter that her man played the Temple of Light like a monkey and would soon drive them out of the North. But now, when Josiah came out of the 100,000 mountains and found that the Temple of Light was still here, where would he put his face? Would he still have his prestige as a man? Cha! Oh, beautiful lady, please forgive me for intruding. Madam? Oh my God. Sorry, I really couldn't tell. Do you know? Just now, when you came from afar and walked into my eyes, in an instant, I felt that I had found a most beautiful scenery on this journey. Just when Tang was very unhappy with the Temple of Light's tortoise strategy, such affectionate words that made women burst with joy and men tremble with disgust suddenly floated in from outside the car. Startled, Tang subconsciously touched his nose. This voice, this dialogue, it felt a little familiar. If you don't mind, can you give me a few minutes? I want to freeze this beautiful scenery in my heart forever. Wow, did you agree? Thank you, beautiful and generous madam. I believe that I must have received the favor of the goddess of luck today. Hearing this, Tang grinned and pulled open the curtains. He found that the carriage had arrived at the residence, which was the outer street of the secret organization. Looking around, he quickly found the source of the familiar voice on the side of the street. There were not many people on the street, and most of them looked hurried. Only in front of a clothing store was an elegant young woman in a luxurious dress, gently stroking her hair. She stood still with a smile on her face, and there was an unconcealable joy in her expression. Not far in front of her was a man holding a drawing board. From time to time, he would look up at the young woman and chuckle. Then he would lower his head to draw something, like a wandering painter who made a living by sketching people on the street. Although his back was facing her, Tang looked up and down at the wandering painter. The corners of his mouth could not help but curl up slightly. It was really this playboy. After thinking about it, Tang called for the carriage to stop. He picked up a wide-brimmed hat from the carriage and put it on his head. Then he opened the curtain and walked down, sandwiched in the crowd, and walked toward the two people. Chapter 861. Let's rewind time to a few minutes ago, when a violent explosion in the tavern faintly echoed in the sky above the city. The residents outside the city stopped in their tracks. They didn't look up at the sky, thinking that it was just thunder in the clouds. Instead, they subconsciously looked around, their legs trembling, and their faces full of fear and uneasiness. In fact, from these small actions, one could see that the residents in the city were very insecure. Among the crowd, on the main road in the west of the city, there was an old man and a middle-aged man. They didn't look around in panic like the passers-by. Instead, they turned their heads to the north immediately, as if they were very sure that the explosion came from that direction. And that was indeed the case. I haven't been to the north for many years. I didn't expect it to become so chaotic here. Shaking his head slightly, the old man in green withdrew his gaze and sighed softly. It shouldn't have been like this in the past. The middle-aged man looked at the crowd that was hurriedly dispersing around him and frowned. hiding his anger. How dare they, Temple of Light? The situation has evolved to the point where everyone is in danger, and they still want to block the news from the north and south? Where is the safety of the empire? I was wondering why the northern wilderness tribes were in such a hurry to attack after suffering a great defeat last year. They should have seen the current situation in the north. The old man in green was quite broad-minded, mentioning the northern wilderness tribes as soon as he spoke. However, the middle-aged man didn't have the slightest doubt when he heard this. He nodded solemnly. That should be the case. This wasn't the same as making money to buy cabbages and worrying about selling white powder. Although everyone was responsible for the rise and fall of the world, they weren't ordinary people. However, they were not ordinary people. They were the objects of worship that ordinary people placed their hopes on. The god of swords, Wuding, and his eldest disciple, Haida. Of course, because Wu Ding hadn't left the mountain for many years, not to mention the residents of the north. Even the people in the capital of Bran might not be able to recognize him. Walking on the bustling streets of Hansui City now, no one paid attention to this inconspicuous old farmer. Passing by in a hurry, no one knew that they had brushed shoulders with the Bran god of swords. They even nodded at him and smiled subconsciously. Wu Ding, on the other hand, had vaguely guessed the fuse of the great war that was soon to come. However, his expression remained calm as he walked casually along with the crowd. You were right earlier. The Imperium has indeed reached a time of turmoil. Haita was still frowning. Master, what should we do? Oh, then what should we do? When the tribes attack, the supplies and reinforcements to the front line have to pass through the north. Therefore, this place must be settled down, the sooner the better. His tone was resolute and decisive. Haita's face was solemn. The main reason for the chaos in the north is the temple in Tang Yin. The influence of the temple is far-reaching, and the riot of believers is the biggest chaos at present. However, as long as war broke out and the Empire issued a notice regarding this matter, it should be able to temporarily suppress it. In this way, the only thing that can be considered chaotic is the battle between the temple and the countless warriors gathered by Twain using the secret manuals. Wu Ding nodded slightly, agreeing with his eldest disciple's analysis. He then asked calmly, "Then which side do you think we should stand on this time?" "The temple," Haita said without hesitation. "When I came here, I investigated the situation of the temple. Now they are in a very difficult situation. Tang Yin has indeed made a good move. He has almost completely suppressed the forces of the temple in the north by himself. It's amazing. However, the temple would rather suffer continuous losses than withdraw from the north. It's a good move to seek survival in the midst of death. Now, as long as they don't take the initiative to retreat, Tang Yin can't drive them out of the north, even if he has the ability to reach the heavens. The reason is that he doesn't have enough power. In Haita's view, Tang Yin's biggest problem was that he didn't have enough power. Although the gray space and the secret organization were good, the scale of their forces was still too small. Although Twain could order the countless warriors controlled by the secret manual to attack the clergy, such attacks could not cause fatal damage to the temple in a short period of time. Nor could he control them to drive the temple out of the north as if they were his own arms. Because such a requirement was too broad, the content of the mission was not easy to set. Tang Yin couldn't just write a mission to drive the temple out of the north. Even if someone accepted it, the warriors wouldn't know where to start. If the mission was divided into steps, it would still take time. In fact, this was Tang Yin's previous plan. At that time, he didn't know that the Gray Coat Army was coming. So when he saw that the temple was completely shameless, he was mentally prepared for a long battle. He expected to exhaust the other party bit by bit. Back to the main point. Tang Yin needed time, but Haita, who knew that the northern wilderness was about to launch a large-scale attack, could not wait. Tang Yin didn't have enough power, so Haita decided to stand on the temple's side. This decision was not mixed with any emotional factors. Although Haita and Tang Yin had no friendship, the Sword Gods faction did not have a good impression of the Temple of Light. Therefore, Haita decided to stand on the temple's side because Tang Yin's power was small and easy to deal with. He could help them quell the chaos in the north in the shortest time. There was no other way. In the face of the general trend, although it was cruel to sacrifice the weak, this was the reality. Wu Ding nodded noncommittally. How are you going to deal with Tang Yin? I'll definitely hand over the secret technique. As for this person, Haita hesitated and said, Master, you said that he's a genius. I also admire him, especially when I know that he came from the Gray Coat Army and made the temple so embarrassed. Well, Philip has a good relationship with him. This time, we were able to find this place so quickly because of him. Previously, you said that you wanted to see Tang Yun. If Winston didn't insist on going with you, he would definitely want to find Tang Yun alone. Obviously, he also saw something and wanted to report it. If we don't do something to Tang Yun, he may have an opinion. Of course, everything depends on Master. After saying a lot, he did not give any conclusion. It seemed that he was trying to shirk responsibility, but Wu Ding stopped and said with a smile, It seems that you really admire him. Haida chuckled, but didn't say anything. His previous words seemed to have a strong start and a weak finish, but if carefully analyzed, he actually said a lot of good things about Tang Yin. Coming from the Gray Coat Army meant that he was related to junior brothers Wafan. Making the temple so embarrassed was undoubtedly something that the Sword God's faction was happy to see. As for mentioning Philip, I also admire him. If the fighting energy channel in the body was really developed by him, then it's enough for me to admire him, Wu Ding said indifferently. Then, under Haita's shocked gaze, he raised his head and sighed. Alas, Philip, this bastard grandson, has never let me be at ease. I didn't expect that he would make such an interesting friend. Judging from the context, this grandson obviously didn't sound like an insult. In other words, the sword god Wu Ding was actually the playboy Philip's grandfather. Well, if Tang Yin was here, besides being speechless about Philip's frightening background, he would probably sigh that this genetic mutation was too powerful. It was completely the rhythm of a tiger father and a dog son. When it came to family, even Wu Ding, who had been unhindered all his life, couldn't help but sigh. After a while, he recovered his calm expression and said slowly, To be honest, I haven't thought about how to treat Tang Yin. If it was a few decades ago, I would have killed him without hesitation because he was too dangerous for Bran. If it was a few decades ago, I would have tried my best to invite him up the mountain because he could completely change the pattern of fighting energy and martial arts. It's a pity that I'm old now. He sighed faintly and wished to continue. Because he cherished talents, although he knew that Tang Yin was very dangerous, Wu Ding still wanted to invite him up the mountain and let him stay in Wu Ding's small residence. But now Wu Ding was old. Although he cherished talents, he was worried that his remaining lifespan wouldn't be enough to suppress Tang Yun's danger. Therefore, he was very conflicted. Master, he called softly. His tone was somewhat choked. Forget it. It's useless to think too much. Wu Ding patted the shoulder of Haita, who had his head lowered and his fists clenched. His expression was still calm. It won't be too late to make a decision after we meet him. Before he finished speaking, he frowned and turned to look towards the north. Haida also seemed to feel something in an instant. He also looked up and paused. His expression changed. Junior brother? Fought with someone? Chapter 862. On the street. He let out a long sigh. Phew. Beautiful madam, thank you. I think this will be the best work of my life. The elegant young woman covered her mouth in surprise. It's already finished? Oh, sorry, I don't mean anything else. You're the fastest painter I've ever seen. He shrugged. Maybe it's because it's not my first time painting 10,000 years in a glance. Madam's figure has been reflected in my heart thousands of times. I'm just painting it again. Heath, this flirt. Tang Yin stood quietly at the side, speechless as he watched the wandering painter use the opportunity of appreciating the painting together to get close to the elegant young woman. From time to time, his witty words were like pearls, making the beautiful woman smile and tremble. He couldn't help but touch his nose and secretly sighed. This flirting skill has reached the peak. Needless to say, this wandering painter was naturally Philip. Since last year's negotiation, Tang Yin hadn't seen him again. He didn't expect to bump into him here today. Well, He was still as flirty as ever. However, he had to admit that this kid did have the capital to indulge in flirting. Although there was a distance between them, Tang In squinted his eyes and looked. He could still see the image of a beautiful young woman drawn with just a few strokes on the drawing board. She smiled faintly and vividly. TSK, she was definitely at the level of a master. Thank you. This is the best painting I've ever seen. Really? Well, can you give it to me? Of course, it's my honor. Philip bowed and chuckled. His handsome face, coupled with his elegant demeanor, made the female killer index soar instantly. He wanted to say something more, but when he looked up, he happened to see Tang In with a faint smile on his face. His expression suddenly froze. Tang, then, to express my gratitude. The elegant young woman stroked her hair. She didn't notice Philip's expression and took the initiative to say, I know a restaurant not far from here. The afternoon tea there is good. At this point, she paused. However, any normal man would know that this was the subtext of a date. Philip, who had the nickname of the imperial capital's Flower Wolf, naturally knew this better. However, he was a little absent-minded as he looked at Tang In. Is that so? Well, I'm sorry. I suddenly remembered that I still have something important to do, so... Oh, it's fine. The elegant young woman couldn't hide the regret on her face. That's it then leave an address, or I can give it to you. You know, your drawing is really good. I also want to ask you. Philip opened his mouth, sighed softly, and rudely interrupted. I'm sorry, madam. My friend is a little impatient. He raised his hand and pointed at Tang In, who was stunned at the side. He seems to be jealous. No, he... Angry, yes, angry. I have to go and comfort him. Although he changed his words in time, the modest smile that followed seemed like he was trying to cover it up. Boom, boom, boom. Thunder rumbled. Oh, is that so? Then, I won't disturb you. The elegant young woman's bright and clean face instantly froze. Her beautiful face turned pale, and she waved her hand and retreated in panic. Tang In, who had been rubbing his chin and watching the scene, heard this, and his face instantly fell. Damn it, what the hell is going on? In a trance, Philip hurried over, grabbed his sleeve, and ran. Damn it, I've been waiting for you for so long, and you're finally back. Run quickly. Run? Wait, what are you waiting for? Do you still want to keep your life? Run. Philip looked very anxious, as if he couldn't wait to drag Tang In and run thousands of miles away. What's the situation? After running a few steps, Tang In subconsciously slapped Philip's hand away. Ah, the elegant young woman who had retreated to the corner of the street in the distance couldn't help but exclaim when she saw this awkward scene. Her expression was disgusted. Then, when she saw Tang In and Philip turn around, she immediately covered her mouth and disappeared from the corner of the street. The corner of Tang In's mouth twitched, and his face was a little ugly. Then, he said angrily, What the hell are you doing? You're here to wait for me? You know I'm here? Nonsense. I have acquaintances in that secret organization. Of course, I'm waiting for you. Otherwise, why would I let that girl go? I've already gotten her, and I've sacrificed a lot. Bah! Now, it was not the time to talk about this. Run quickly, or you'll lose your life. When Tang In heard this, he remembered that during the negotiation, Philip did know some of the contact points of the secret organization and knew some people. But what are you talking about? You have to explain the situation clearly, right? It's too late. Hey, why don't you listen to me? Although Philip had an extremely powerful background, he himself wasn't very powerful. So, if Tang In didn't want to leave, it would be useless for him to drag him away. Helpless, he could only explain briefly. You've caused too much of a ruckus this time. My grandfather is already here. He asked me to invite you to meet him, but I think he might be here to kill you. So you better hurry up and run. Your grandfather? The more Tang In listened, the more confused he became. What does your grandfather's arrival have to do with me? Wait. Your grandfather isn't the Pope, right? Philip rolled his eyes. Get lost. My grandfather is Wu Ding. Oh, that's good. Since your grandfather isn't the Pope. Suddenly, Tang In paused, as if he was suddenly struck by lightning. His movements and expression froze instantly. After a moment, he blinked and asked hesitantly, "Wu Ding? Which Wu Ding? What do you think?" Philip pursed his lips. "What the F asterisk CK?" He muttered subconsciously. Tang, and suddenly remembered something. Last year, Jack took one of Philip's daggers. As a result, that dagger directly sent Yemaw flying and broke one of his arms. Tang and remembered asking Philip about it at that time. At that time, he only said that it was a gift from his elder. F asterisk CK, stupid, other than the sword god. Who else could seal such a sharp sword light in a dagger and crush a void-level powerhouse? I should have thought of it earlier. Tang in. Hey, are you scared now? Do you know why I was so anxious just now? Philip called out repeatedly. He was somewhat gloating. However, when Tang came back to his senses, his first reaction was to look up and down at Philip with a strange gaze. He shook his head and sighed. The difference, Philip's face darkened when he heard this. He instantly stomped his feet. F asterisk CK. I came all the way from the capital of the brand to inform you, and you F asterisk king ridicule me. Besides, what did I do? In terms of picking up girls, I'm F asterisk king #1 in the world. Hey, you not afraid? What am I afraid of? Tang spread his hands. I admit that your grandfather is very powerful, but I didn't provoke him. Why should I be afraid? You didn't provoke my grandfather, but you provoked the Bran Empire, Big Brother. Philip smiled bitterly. Look at what you've done to the Bran North. Even I can't stand it anymore, let alone my grandfather who has protected the Bran all his life. How can he let a dangerous person like you go? F asterisk CK, your grandfather really cares about everything. Curling his lips, Tang frowned slightly. In the face of a potential opponent like the Sword God, it was impossible to say that he was not worried at all. Although he was famous, it was difficult to live up to his name. However, to be recognized as the strongest person in this world where martial arts were respected, it was impossible for him to be a fake. Could it be that he had to run away again? It had to be said that although the name of the sword god of the brand was enough to shake the continent, Tang would not belittle his own abilities, especially his ability to escape. He was still very confident in this. After all, no matter how powerful the sword god was, it was impossible for him to travel thousands of miles in an instant and find him in the vast sea of people at a glance. That was a god, not a human. Besides, if he could really do that, he would not need Philip to lead the way. However, Tang was a little unwilling to escape just like that. This was not because of his pride. If he could not win, he would escape. If he could win, he would fight. This had always been his motto. He did it without any psychological pressure. However, he would never sacrifice himself for glory. The reason why he was unwilling was because the current situation was under control. He was about to suppress the temple and lay a solid foundation for the Grey Coat Army to kill their way out of the 100,000 mountains. If he were to be disrupted by a sudden change, even if this change was the strongest person in the world, he would naturally be unwilling to accept it. Well, at least he had to determine the attitude of the sword god first before making any plans. After thinking for a while, Tang made up his mind. He raised his head and prepared to get information about his grandfather from Philip. But at this moment, suddenly, with a frown, Tang suddenly turned his head to the north, which was the location of the secret organization. He paused. "Where's your grandfather now? When I came out in the morning, he was at the hotel in the city." "What's wrong?" Tang did not answer and asked anxiously, "Did you come alone?" At this time, Philip also saw that Tang's expression was a little strange. He shook his head honestly. "No, I came with Winston, my grandfather's youngest disciple. But in order to stop you here, I found an excuse to sneak out first." "Winston?" F asterisk CK. Tang's expression changed when he heard this. His body shook slightly and rushed across the street like an arrow leaving the bow, instantly disappearing into the northern alley. "Oh, what's wrong?" Philip, who was left behind, was puzzled. Then he suddenly thought of something and his body froze. F asterisk CK, F asterisk CK. Don't tell me they're fighting. Hey, Wait for me. Tang-in, don't be impulsive. Winston was in a very bad mood, especially after sitting in this empty hall for a long time. Not only did he not see Tang-in, but he also seemed to be ignored. It was fine that he did not know where Philip had run off to. This person had always been unreliable. Although he was a direct descendant of the Sword God clan and had a unique advantage, he did not think about martial arts. Instead, he left the nickname of Flower Wolf in the imperial capital. It was ridiculous. But even if Philip had run away, what was wrong with the servants here? Did they not know how to do anything else other than serving tea and water? What about Tang-in, who had asked several times? Even if he did not know when he would come back, he could at least inform him or tell him roughly where he was going. Saying that he did not know was completely perfunctory. Tightening his grip on the spear in his hand and suppressing the anger in his heart, Winston frowned slightly and thought to himself, could it be that they had already seen through my purpose of coming here? That's right. The reason why Winston had come with Philip this time was indeed because he had some plans of his own. It could even be said that he did not come with good intentions, because he felt that his master's evaluation was biased. The martial arts talent that he had shown since he was young had been amazing and praised by the world. Among his peers, there was no one who could compare to him. It was also because of this that he was able to stand out among countless people and become the Sword God's disciple. But now, a guy who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere was actually called a genius by the heavens by his master. His talent far surpassed his own, although Winston later found out that his master was not talking about pure martial arts talent, but the creation of a new Do-Chi channel in the body. But no matter what, since you were a genius by the heavens, then I have to weigh your weight. Winston's idea was very simple. No matter what kind of talent one had, strength was always the most direct reflection. In other words, if everyone fought, as long as I defeated you, your so-called title of a genius by the heavens would no longer exist, and I would still be the most talented person in the world. The above was also the reason why Winston wanted to come over. But the reality was beyond his expectations. He came full of fighting spirit and sat there for a long time, but his opponent did not appear. How shameful. In fact, this really cannot be blamed on Tang-in. He did have something to do outside, which was to inspect the Purple Cannon production base with Lena. This could not be blamed on the subordinates that Winston mentioned, which were the people of the secret organization. Not to mention that the mouth of the people in this line of work was tight. Even for ordinary people, if the boss wanted to go out, would he have to report it to his employees? So they really did not know. Of course, Winston did not know about this. Even if he knew, he would think that it was an excuse. So now he was very depressed, very angry, and very angry. It was also at this time that David and the others returned. But David and Philip knew each other very well, if anyone had mentioned it. They knew that Winston was Philip's friend, so of course they would treat him well. But coincidentally, at this time, the member of the secret organization who accompanied them outside the door went to pour water, so David and the others looked at the stranger who was sitting quietly in the hall with an expression that told people not to come close. "Who are you? Who are you?" That was all he said. He didn't say anything else. It was originally a normal question to meet for the first time, but Winston instantly exploded. "I'm the last disciple of the Sword God, and you're asking me who I am? I've been waiting here for half a day, and you're asking me who I am? You're teasing me." With a whoosh, Winston, who felt humiliated, twisted his face and directly raised his spear. David and the others were dumbfounded on the spot and looked at each other. What was going on? Then, without waiting for David to hesitate, he asked, "Is there a problem with my question?" A sharp spear intent had already slashed towards them. Fortunately, David and the others were sensitive to killing intent, so their bodies instinctively reacted and instantly dodged. Then, the battle broke out naturally in this muddle-headed state. Winston had the strength of 1 foot into the threshold of void rank. So from the beginning of the battle, it was naturally a one-sided suppression. Of course, although Winston was angry, he was only using this as an excuse to vent the anger in his chest. He did not have any intention of directly killing David and the others. This was not because he was soft-hearted, but because he disdained to do so. It was roughly the meaning of not killing nameless juniors under his sword. But now he was a little interested at not bad archery, innate divine strength. This joint assassination method. In the hall, the purple spear light crisscrossed, easily crushing the attacks of David and the others. However, Winston's expression revealed a bit of playful interest. Rode could see that David and the others were not simple, and as the disciple of the sword god, Winston could naturally see it as well. In just a short moment, he noticed one thing from the attacks of David and the others. That was, if their strength was similar, these people could smoothly kill martial artists of the same level, and even challenge those of a higher level. This evaluation was not low. It must be known that the standard for geniuses in this world was to be able to do the feat of challenging those of a higher level. Winston did not expect that the group of people he casually met here were all existences comparable to geniuses. Although their genius lay in all kinds of killing techniques, as long as they could defeat their opponents, who dared to say that they were not geniuses? With this knowledge, Winston became even more unhappy. Because if these small characters were all geniuses, then wouldn't that Tang In be a genius? Twitching the corner of his mouth, Winston was a little unhappy, so he decided to add a little more strength. Roar. With a furious roar, David, as a strong attacker in the gray space, naturally felt the increase in the power of the purple spear at the first moment. The muscles in his arms instantly bulged, blocking the greatsword. With a loud clang, at the same time he blocked the spear, his feet collapsed by a foot, and the floor scattered in all directions. As expected of innate divine strength. Then take another one of my spear. Seeing that the spear was blocked, Winston was not surprised at all, and once again swung his spear expressionlessly. The so-called innate divine strength was also the astonishing innate strength. Even if such people were not as strong as their opponents, their pure strength was not necessarily weaker than high-level martial artists. A typical example was Sylvia and Tang In. Of course, there was a limit to human strength. After Winston added a little more Do Chi, David's feet once again collapsed by a foot. With a crisp crack, the right arm holding the sword bent unnaturally, obviously fractured. However, David stretched out his left hand as if he didn't feel it, and firmly held the sword with a roar. The Do Chi burst out violently, continuously pouring into the sword, like a wave, one higher than the other, so endless. Under the heavy pressure, he actually slightly lifted the 1,000-gene spear. Hey, this is... Looking at such a strange Do Chi outburst, Winston couldn't help but be startled. It seemed to be very familiar. Tide battle. They have received the Do Chi outburst training of their sect. On the roof of the attic, more than 100 meters away from the hall, Haita said the name of David's strange Do Chi outburst. He couldn't help but be stunned, and then he understood. On the side, Wu Ding's eyes moved slightly, and a hint of pain flashed by. Obviously, they all guessed the reason. This tide battle was one of the Do Chi outburst methods of the Sword God sect. Only those who had received the unique Do Chi outburst training method of the Sword God sect could learn it. And the reason why these people from the Gray Coat Army in front of them knew how to use it, naturally, it could only be because Zhou Fan taught it. And thinking of Zhou Fan for a moment, the two people on the roof were silent. Chapter 863. Wu Ding's guess was correct. Apart from Tang In, who didn't cultivate battle chi, the other members of the Gray Space had all been trained by Zhou Fan for a period of time. They had also learned the Battle of Tides at that time. Seeing this, Haita came back to his senses and sighed softly. I will go and stop Junior Brother. Regardless of whether these people were Zhou Fan's disciples or not, it was certain that they were related to Zhou Fan. In other words, they were related to Sword God's faction. In this way, the matter of fellow disciples killing each other naturally couldn't be allowed to happen. Let's wait for a while. Suddenly changing his words, Wu Ding looked towards the south and said softly, someone will come and stop it. Haita was a bit surprised when he heard this and followed his gaze towards the south. It must be known that Wu Ding hadn't made up his mind on how to deal with Tang In, and when Silen's actions had undoubtedly put them in a passive position. After all, no matter who was right or wrong, it was a fact that both sides had attacked. Therefore, taking advantage of the fact that there weren't any major casualties, stopping it as soon as possible was naturally the best choice. However, Wu Ding seemed to have sensed something. After thinking about it, he decided to let the situation develop like this. If someone would stop it, it meant that there wasn't anyone yet. Therefore, the battle continued. When Silen was still in control of the battle, and even increased his battle chi. Battle of Tides. My cheap senior brother must have taught you. Haha, showing off your slight skill in front of an expert. How laughable. When Silen pressed down his arm, the purple spear lightly tapped the heavy sword and accurately hit the gap between the Battle of Tides. In an instant, David's endless Battle of Tides stagnated and showed signs of shattering. Battle of Tides, just like its name, the focus was on the two words tides. If there were no external interference, the Battle of Tides would continue to erupt like waves, one higher than the previous one, eventually forming an unstoppable and wanton ocean. But since when Silen recognized it, he naturally understood the flaws in this battle of magical powers very well. He broke it with a wave of his hand and shook his head continuously. Too weak, too weak. I don't think you have the right to cultivate this battle of magical powers. So, let me take it back with my sect. As his words fell, when Silen curled his lips in a cold and arrogant manner, he shook his long spear and a green and purple-colored dough chi surged out. It similarly took the form of a tidal wave. However, this tidal wave did not seem to have the slightest gap. The moment it was released, it was the terrifying might of thunder and lightning. Needless to say, this was naturally a tide battle. Since he had said that he wanted to take back David and the others' cultivation rights, then when Silen would naturally want to show the corresponding ability and completely defeat the other party in the same field, so that he could rightfully take back the rights. Yes, that's right, when Silen was being arrogant. But right at this moment, an indifferent voice suddenly sounded from behind. Is that so? Winston raised a sharp eyebrow. Without even turning his head, he quickly pulled back his long spear and stabbed it behind him from below his ribs. He executed an extremely well-practiced back thrust. There was not the slightest hesitation or pause in the middle, as if he had long since expected that there would be someone behind him. However, this thrust of his spear still pierced nothing. When he turned his head, there was no one behind him. Instead, the faces of David and the others around him lit up, and they instantly retreated from the battle circle. You want to take it back? That indifferent and emotionless voice once again sounded from behind him, just as if it had turned around at the same time as when Silen. Swiftly stabbing again, it still missed. You don't have that right. Pretending to be mysterious. 2 consecutive thrusts pierced nothing, and when Silen could not help but be shocked in his heart. However, on the surface, he still curled his lips in disdain. He turned his long spear, and layers upon layers of spear shadows suddenly waved rapidly in all directions. He raised his head and shouted angrily, "Get out here, idiot! It's right in front of your eyes." With a faint sigh of regret, when Silen suddenly raised his head and his pupils abruptly contracted. A few imperceptible blood blades were like fish in water, easily passing through the layers upon layers of spear shadows and arriving right in front of his eyes. So fast, a shocking thought flashed through his mind. Fortunately, when Silen was not a fledgling who did not have any actual combat experience, it was impossible for the sword god to teach such a disciple. Subconsciously, he stepped back and bent his waist. With a hiss, as light as the sound of the wind, the blood-colored blade light flashed past his eyes without the slightest bit of smoke and fire. Then an extremely ordinary face brushed past. This was Tang Yin. This was naturally Tang Un. Although Tang and did not have the magical ability of sword god Wu Ding to sense people fighting in the city from a distant city. However, a Void Realm martial artist was not far away from him, releasing his Do Chi without any concealment. Naturally, he would be able to sense it. However, he was still a step too late. David's arm was already fractured. Damn! When he came, Tang, and had also thought about how to deal with this when Sillin. Tang did not care about this person. No matter how amazing his talent was, how amazing his background was, in Tangen's eyes, these were all floating clouds. The only troublesome thing was his identity as the sword god's last disciple. If he could not offend him, Tang naturally did not want to offend the brand's #1 expert for no reason. But after seeing that David was injured, Tang went berserk, and all his worries were instantly thrown aside. Damn it, if you touch my people, you have to die. That was what Tang thought, and that was what he did. Without waiting for Sillin to pull away and once again launch his spear, he directly waved his dagger and attacked. Under his full strength, countless blood-colored blades of light instantly drowned Sillin. In close combat, a genuine Void Realm martial artist would not be able to gain any advantage in the hands of Tang, let alone Sillin, who was only one step into the Void Realm. In a short moment, Sillin retreated more than 10 steps and rushed out of the hall. However, the blood-colored blade light was like a maggot, following him like a shadow. First, he started to retreat purely out of strategic consideration, which was to open up a distance for the spear to counterattack. However, Sillin was shocked to find that not only did he not achieve his goal, but he also made his opponent's momentum stronger, and he became even more passive. Attack, attack, attack. Retreat, retreat, retreat. Not long after, across the open space outside the hall, Sillin crashed into the outer wall in a sorry state, and dust flew everywhere. However, this did not change the battle situation in the slightest. He was still suppressed without any room to breathe. Up until now, other than the 2 previous thrusts, he actually did not have any chance to attack. How could it be? How could it be? Here it is again. This move again. This damn fighting method, frantically waving the half of his spear to parry, Sillin was shocked and sullen. He felt that Tang was shameless. Not only did he launch a sneak attack first, his fighting method was also so pestering. That's right, it's pestering. How could warriors fight like this? Even if they did not need to open up a distance like magicians, in a battle between warriors, shouldn't they rely on their own strength, martial skills, combat experience, and so on to bombard each other with Do Chi, and finally determine the winner? But now some blood blades obviously couldn't achieve any results, and some blood blades couldn't hurt the vital parts at all. But these blood blades were so trivial, and they attacked relentlessly like buzzing eagles. They couldn't bite people, and they couldn't hurt people. But it was annoying. More importantly, Sillin had no choice but to expend a great deal of effort to block such an attack. Because in a split second, one could not be sure if this seemingly casual attack would instantly turn into a fatal killing move once it was released. Therefore, Sillin had a body of Void Realm Do Chi and all kinds of powerful martial skills, but he did not have a chance to use them at all. He could only retreat to parry and continuously retreat to parry on the roof more than 100 meters away. Lost. Wu Ding narrowed his eyes and looked at the battle below, especially Tang's fighting style that was different from the other world. He paused, shook his head, and sighed. Sillin has no chance. Haitao was stunned when he heard this. Everyone saw Sillin's passive situation, but it was only passive on the battlefield and did not mean anything. At least Sillin could still resist and was not injured, and the battle had only been going on for about a minute. But he was already defeated? If he did not understand, he had to ask. Master, disciple does not understand. Although Junior Brother is in a critical situation now, he is using tidal Do Chi. The more he fights, the stronger he gets. When he accumulates to a certain level, he still has a chance to succeed, right? Wu Ding shook his head. You are wrong. This is not a matter of the strength of the Do Chi. No matter how strong the Do Chi is, if it is not released reasonably and cannot hit accurately, it will not hurt people. Just like how the Do Chi in this world is so terrifying, but we are still alive and well in it. This is a matter of the rhythm of the battle. From the beginning, Sillin was completely brought into the opponent's rhythm of the battle, using his weakness to attack the opponent's strength. Even if he was able to realize this problem later, He was already deeply immersed in it, unable to extricate himself, and had no chance to break out. In other words, the moment he breaks the stalemate will be the moment he loses. This person's fighting rhythm is close combat. Pause for a while. Wu Ding pointed at Tang. This person's close combat ability is the first I have seen in my life. It is completely unreasonable. Chapter 864. It doesn't make sense. There were many things that didn't make sense in this world. For example, why could other people's children be born into wealthy families, have no worries about food and clothing, and have plenty of beautiful women? But I was born into poverty. During the day, I had to bend my back for 5 buckets of rice, and at night, I had to work myself half to death for my barrel-waisted wife. Another example was why I joined the same sect and practiced the same techniques. The children of other families could easily advance to the next level, enjoy the attention of the public, and enjoy glory. I spent several times more time, but I was stuck at the bottleneck and couldn't move. I was left far behind, and no one cared about me. Why? There was no answer because it didn't make sense. But one thing was certain, and that was that most of the things that didn't make sense basically represented helplessness or no solution. So when Haita heard the completely unreasonable evaluation from his master, Wu Ding, for a moment, he felt that he had misheard. What kind of joke was this? What did the sword god mean by unreasonable? He couldn't help but ask again. What? Looking at the shocked expression on his eldest disciple's face, Wu Ding was calm and waved his hand. Don't be too surprised. Because of the nature of fighting aura, there aren't many warriors who are good at close combat in this world. And more powerful they are, the fewer there are. After all, who doesn't want to have the power to overturn mountains and fill seas with a wave of their hand? This person dared to open up a new path and cultivate his close combat ability to the extreme. It's normal to say that he's invincible in this field. The truth was indeed so. In this world filled with fighting aura and magical elements, a warrior like Twain who specialized in close combat was indeed an anomaly, and an extremely rare one. So the pressure of competition was small, and it wasn't surprising that he was invincible. And to be honest, Tang En's approach wasn't worth advocating, because Tang En had the system space, the old butler, blood energy, and so on. He had the confidence to embark on this path. But the warriors of other worlds were different. They faced the world of fighting aura, so they basically couldn't replicate Tang En's success. Only the fighting aura system was their real way out. It was also because of this that Tang En asked Zhuo Fan to be David's teacher, instead of teaching them himself. After understanding the difference, Haita breathed a sigh of relief and gradually calmed down. At the same time, another problem had to be faced. He turned his head and asked, "Master, do you need me to stop him?" As soon as he finished speaking, Haita was first stunned, and then he couldn't help but shake his head and smile bitterly, because not long ago, he had said something similar. However, at that time, he had stopped Junior Brother Wensilin to prevent the situation from getting out of hand. Now, he had to stop Tang En so that his junior brother wouldn't lose his life. He shook his head. Wensilin's path of martial arts has always been extremely smooth, with few setbacks. Over time, he will inevitably grow arrogant. Now, there was a rare opportunity for him to suffer a blow and hone his self-reflection. This was a good thing, so there was no need to stop it. And, with a smile, Wu Ding pointed at Tang En, who was flashing like a ghost in the field. Haha, didn't you notice? He has already discovered us. Tang En had indeed discovered Wu Ding and Sword God. Although he didn't know what the Sword God looked like, it wasn't difficult to guess the identity of these two people who were openly standing on a distant roof and talking and laughing while facing this battle. However, even so, Tang En didn't intend to let Wensilin off so easily. Even if he couldn't kill him on the spot, he had to avenge David's broken bones no matter what. He secretly made up his mind and said, "This is all you have? This is what you boasted about taking back the qualification for the Tide battle?" Ha! A disdainful chuckle came from all directions, and Wensilin's body trembled slightly when he heard this. His hands gripped the body of the spear tightly, and his teeth almost shattered as he forced out angry words. If you have the ability, don't use this despicable method to pester me. So it's like this. Then why don't I retreat 10 feet away and ask a referee to come over? First, we agree not to hit the face, and then call 3, 2, 1, and then we start fighting together? Haha, what do you think of this idea? Winston's face was ashen. No matter how stupid he was, he could still hear the ridicule in these words. However, he couldn't refute because of this. Because this was the logic. Fighting wasn't playing house. The winner was king, and the loser was in the wrong. This was the truth since ancient times. If he said too much, then he couldn't afford to lose. So Winston simply pursed his lips tightly and didn't say anything else. However, Tang didn't want to let him go. He sighed regretfully again. Too weak, too weak. I don't think you have a right to carry Fan's shoes. So, let me cripple you on behalf of your sect. As soon as he finished speaking, roar. There was a ferocious roar. Hearing this very familiar dialogue, which was what he had said just now, but now it was being slightly modified and used to mock him, Winston's eyes spat fire, and he instantly went berserk. Bastard, I want you to die. The spear swept horizontally, and the green-purple fighting aura wildly expanded in the roar. Each wave was higher than the last, and in an instant, it covered an area of 10 feet around him. Winston finally couldn't bear it anymore. He was now willing to risk his life and use a powerful fighting technique to directly blast Tang into pieces. But, damn it, stupid, the former came from a sea tower. Although he hadn't been able to completely see through Tang's close combat, he remembered what his master had said just now. The moment he broke the stalemate, Winston would be defeated. The latter's low shout came from Wu Ding. At this time, an angry expression suddenly appeared on his aged face, as if he expected better from Winston. Winston's strength was inferior to Tang's. This was a fact, but if he could calm down and stabilize his defense, the fighting aura of the Void Realm was not a joke. In addition, under the guidance of the Sword God for many years, Tang wouldn't be able to finish the battle in a short period of time. This was also in line with Wu Ding's intention to let Winston experience more training. But at this time, Winston's mind was in a mess. Under the dizziness, he didn't care about defense anymore. He was going to stake everything and directly fight for his life. This was, of course, the most stupid decision. The reason why Tang couldn't immediately take him down was that his defense was not bad, and he couldn't find a chance to attack for a while. But now he took the initiative to abandon defense. Wasn't it just sending a pillow when he was sleepy? It just happened to fulfill Tang's wish. Sure enough, with a long laugh, without waiting for Winston's powerful martial skill to show its embryonic form, Tang instantly dodged the blue and purple long spear and closed in like a ghost. At this time, he didn't need the dagger. He directly reached out and grabbed Winston's left wrist. He just took the opportunity and pulled in the opposite direction. The clear ka-ka-ka sound of bones breaking instantly came out. It was hair-raising to hear. This was not the end. In the midst of Winston's earth-shattering scream, Tang used his finger as a knife and cleanly slashed away the blue and purple long spear that was randomly swinging at him. Then, he grabbed Winston's right wrist again. Ka-ka-ka. The same scene played out again. If you break one of David's arms, I will shatter both of your arms. It's very fair, isn't it? After doing all this in an instant, Tang inexpressionlessly took a step back and raised his foot. Tang you must not be impulsive. Huh? At the arched door of the outer wall, Philip, who was drenched in sweat, stopped in his tracks. He stared blankly at a familiar figure suddenly whizzing past before his eyes and falling freely. Then, with a boom, he crashed into the courtyard wall not far away, causing dust to fly everywhere. Outside the hole in the wall, people from the secret organization stuck their heads out to look. They shook their heads and shrank back. The courtyard was silent. After a moment, Philip stiffly turned his head and said with a long face, "You killed him." "I thought so. Didn't you hear that loud and miserable scream?" Hearing this, Philip immediately let out a long sigh of relief. Then, His face became nervous again. "He won't be crippled, right?" Tang Yin rolled his eyes in annoyance. "Do you need me to find a doctor for him?" There's no need." The matter had still escalated to this point, and Philip was also very helpless. He wanted to say something, but when he saw David's unnaturally bent arm, he smacked his lips and wisely chose to keep his mouth shut. Of course, at this moment, Tang Yin did not care about Philip's attitude. Turning around, he met the gazes of the two people in the distance. After a moment of silence, he spread his hands and looked somewhat innocent. After a while, an old and gentle voice rang out. "I am Wu Ding." As expected, the victim's family had come knocking. Tang Yin sighed softly and saluted from afar. "I am Tang Yin. Have you eaten lunch yet?" Chapter 865. Eating would always be the unchanging main theme of human life. It didn't matter if you were a hermit who absorbed the essence of day and night, or an ethereal and untainted beauty. As long as you were still human, you naturally had to eat. Although the sword god was called a god by the world, it was only a respectful title. In the end, he was still a human. Therefore, when faced with Tang Yin's invitation, the sword god Wu Ding didn't show any hesitation. He calmly nodded and directly said yes. Thus, smoke rose from the kitchen of the secret organization. After a while, in a small hall, two people sat opposite each other at a brown wooden table. The atmosphere was a little dull. The plates in front of them were steaming hot. There were 3 dishes and 1 soup. It was very simple. It was a common home-cooked meal that would often appear on the tables of ordinary citizens, accompanied by 2 bowls of white rice. That was all. Slightly adjusting his sitting posture, Tang Yin's expression was extremely calm. There was even a hint of a polite smile at the corner of his mouth. There was no doubt that he had the demeanor of a host. But in his heart, he couldn't help but feel a little nervous, to be honest. Tang Yin really didn't think that there would be a day when he would eat at the same table as the sword god. Although he had taken the initiative to invite him before, it was only out of politeness for Philip's sake. Who would have thought that the other party would actually nod and agree? For a moment, Tang Yin's imagination was running wild. This is the King sword god. Isn't my meal too simple? The table also seems a little greasy. Do I need to find 2 chicks to liven things up? Of course, in the midst of all these random thoughts, Tang Yin didn't consider whether the sword god's actions were a sign of goodwill. Originally, not to mention the bad news from Philip, just the fact that he had beaten up the disciple of someone who was proud of him wasn't something that could be bribed with a meal. Thinking of this, and looking at Wu Ding's fixed gaze, Tang Yin unconsciously adjusted his sitting posture. The dagger in his sleeve trembled slightly, ensuring that it would be ready to strike at any moment. Then, they stared at each other, and the atmosphere became more and more tense. After a while, just as Tang Yin's temples were slightly wet, Wu Ding looked at the disappearing rice wipe and frowned slightly. "Not eating? Huh?" Stunned for a moment, Tang Yin came back to his senses. He squeezed out a smile and hurriedly waved his hand in invitation. "How could that be? Please, please. These are all northern home-cooked dishes. Please excuse me. Well, it might be slightly heavier than the southern cuisine. I hope you don't mind." "It's fine." Casually shaking his head, Wu Ding picked up his knife and fork and started eating. His arm froze in midair, and he was stunned. Tang Yin suddenly remembered that in the other world's customs and etiquette, there was a rule that stated that when a guest went to another person's house, if the host did not invite the guest was not allowed to use a knife or fork first. "Damn it. Just because of this, you've been glaring at me for so long?" Tang Yin wiped the cold sweat from his forehead under great pressure. He felt that it was ridiculous. Fortunately, amidst the crisp sounds of cutlery hitting the plates, the stiff atmosphere in the side hall gradually eased up. The northern cuisine had a strong taste. Something similar to the modern world's pepper was basically a necessary seasoning in the north. Not long after, Wu Dinghua's forehead under her white hair began to show faint traces of sweat. When Tang Yin saw this, he handed over a napkin. Wu Ding nodded and took it. The tense atmosphere between the two of them was practically gone. After a moment, he put down his cutlery. I haven't tasted authentic northern cuisine for many years. I'm really not used to eating it now, Wu Ding said casually while wiping the sweat from the side of his nose with a napkin. Sorry, I was careless. Tang nodded apologetically, then asked tentatively, do you want to drink some wine to calm yourself down? Wine? Wu Ding's eyes lit up when he heard this. He looked like a child who had gotten a toy that he wanted for a long time. But at that moment, Hai Ta, who was standing at the side of the hall, suddenly covered her mouth with her fist and coughed. She seemed to be displeased. Wu Ding's shoulders slumped, and he waved his hand dispiritedly. Forget it. Just serve me tea. Okay. Twain nodded. He first waved to the members of the secret agency who were guarding outside the door, then looked at the sea tower before turning around. Not allowed to drink. Maybe it's because of the body. The dishes on the table were removed, and soon 2 cups of fragrant tea were served. Unlike the dishes, the tea was the best tea. It was given to Tang Yin by Alan every time he came over. During this time, the two of them also exchanged a few words, but most of them were just pleasantries. Wu Ding thanked Tang Yin for his hospitality, and Tang Yin said that it was what he should do. Then, they chatted about Philip and so on, until after taking a sip of the tea, Wu Ding's white eyebrows moved slightly. He closed his eyes and savored the taste. He nodded and gently put down the teacup with a soft sound. Tang Yin straightened his back slightly. He knew that the main show was about to begin. Unexpectedly, Wu Ding nodded and saluted. He said solemnly, my disciple was reckless and didn't teach well. Thank you for showing mercy just now. Tang Yin did show mercy just now. Otherwise, it wouldn't be Winston's hand that was broken, but his throat. Of course, Tang Yin also had no choice but to do this after seeing Wu Ding. Wu Ding was also clear about this point. However, in this world, there were many experts who didn't like to be reasonable. Tang Yin didn't expect to move Wu Ding's kindness with this. He didn't expect that Wu Ding, as the sword god, not only did he not pursue Tang Yin's responsibility for crippling his disciple, but he also thanked him first. This made him very surprised, After a pause, Tang Yin came back to his senses. He raised his head and laughed. It's nothing. I've always loved peace and won people over with virtue. Wu Ding also chuckled and changed the topic. He didn't comment on Tang Yin's flattering words. He said calmly, I've heard all kinds of rumors about you in the capital of Bran. At that time, I was a little curious. Now that I've seen it with my own eyes, I'm even more confused. Tang Yin didn't immediately respond. Instead, he waved his hand and said, You're too polite. I really can't bear to be addressed as such. Philip and I call each other friends. Since you're Philip's grandfather, you can call me Tang, Tang Yin, Little Tang, or whatever. This was indeed Tang Yin's sincere suggestion, because at least from the current point of view, the sword god Wu Ding didn't show any hatred for him. Instead, he was quite gentle and polite, as if he treated him as someone of the same level. And Tang Yin's temper was just like that. As the saying goes, if you respect me, I'll respect you tenfold. If you respect me by an inch, well, then don't blame me for calling you an old fart. With your current strength and achievements, you deserve to be addressed as your excellency. But since you don't want to, Wu Ding didn't linger on this matter. He nodded and said, Then I'll call you Little Tang. It sounds more intimate. Little Tang, Little Tang. Well, it's better to call you your excellency. And this was personally acknowledged by the sword god. How honorable would it be if he said it out loud? He touched his nose and complained. But since this form of address was suggested by Tang Yin himself, he had no choice but to agree. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. He paused and rolled his eyes. I will tell you everything that I can. Wu Ding smiled and didn't have any opinion on Tang Yin's reserved attitude. He asked, What you practice is fighting energy? What the F***CK? Tang Yin was so shocked that he almost jumped up on the spot. Of course, he didn't practice fighting energy, but blood energy. But blood energy was related to the assassin system. It was his biggest secret. Could it be that this was seen through by Wu Ding? Although his heart was in turmoil, Tang Yin still looked calm on the surface. Then, it turned into an inexplicable, puzzled expression. After calming down, Tang In still didn't believe that Wu Ding could see through his secret. So he asked blankly, "Of course, what's wrong?" After getting the answer, Wu Ding didn't have any special expression. He shook his head slightly. "Nothing. It's just that I can't see your cultivation realm." Suddenly, Tang Yin knew where the problem was. The fighting energy of another world was tyrannical and difficult to hide. So, in the eyes of high-level martial artists, the strength of low-level martial artists could be seen at a glance. But Tang Yin was different. He practiced blood energy, so even if Wu Ding was in the realm of martial saint, he couldn't see through his strength. "Oh, maybe it's because of the assassin profession. I have some experience in hiding my strength." Waving his hand, Tang Yin casually brushed over the question. Then, his mind turned, and he immediately changed the topic. "All right, you're not the first person to have doubts about my strength. Well, I once went to the northern wilderness. In the Imperial City's library, I met an old man from the northern wilderness called Bamatu. He also had the same doubts and almost mistook me for your disciple." "Ha!" Wu Ding raised his white eyebrows. "Bamatu? You've seen him?" "Yes. He said that you're also good at condensing and hiding fighting energy." Tang Yin secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He felt that his ability to change the topic under the old butler's poisonous tongue was superb. But Wu Ding nodded and looked at Tang Yin with a complicated gaze. "It seems that you really do know about the existence of the knot in the body." "Well," Tang Yin blinked. His expression was still as calm as usual, but his heart was very puzzled. "Knot? What is that? Is it related to the topic of our conversation?" "Forget it. I don't care. Since he has found a reason for me, it can't be better." Wu Ding indeed found a reason for Tang Yin. The reason why he didn't seem to care so much when he couldn't accurately see through Tang Yin's strength was because he already had a preconceived answer in his heart. This Tang Yin was the same as him. They both knew that the knot in the body could store and hide fighting energy, so it was normal that he couldn't see through his strength. And later, Tang Yin's unsurprised expression and his words that he and Wu Ding were both good at hiding fighting energy undoubtedly made Wu Ding even more convinced of his judgment. But in fact, Tang Yin was really just pretending and changing the topic. Thinking that he had confirmed something, Wu Ding picked up the teacup and drank a mouthful of tea. When he put it down, the complicated look in his eyes from before had all returned to indifference. Then he raised his hand and pulled out a few thin pieces of paper from his sleeve, put it on the table, and pushed it over. He raised his head and calmly asked, "Did you research this?" Tang Yin subconsciously lowered his head to take a glance. His gaze immediately focused. He could not be more familiar with the messy lines on the paper. This was because this was the Do Chi circulation channel that he had personally drawn. However, he did not know how it had ended up in the hands of the sword god, but after thinking about it, Tang Yin was relieved. With the power of the sword god, as long as he noticed the turmoil in the north, it was naturally easy to find the source of this madness. "Oh, this." At this point, his words suddenly paused. This pause was very short, it didn't even take a second, and it didn't feel out of place. Because Tang Yin was reaching for the teacup on the side and bringing it to his mouth. Of course, this wasn't because he was suddenly thirsty. For some reason, just a moment ago, the alarm bell in Tang Yin's heart suddenly rang slightly, and he felt a trace of killing intent. There were only 2 people in the side hall, so the source of this killing intent could only be the calm Wu Ding. It had to be said that this killing intent was very faint, and almost undetectable. If it was someone else who was sitting here, even if his strength was equal to Wu Ding's, it would be impossible for him to detect it. But Tang Yin was different. Under the training of the assassin system and the old butler, as long as it was aimed at him, even if it was the slightest, it would be keenly sensed. What's more, at this time, Tang Yin was already in a state of extreme vigilance, but his lips touched the edge of the teacup. Tang Yin smiled and nodded at Wu Ding. Why did Wu Ding suddenly have killing intent towards him? There was a problem with that question. Did you research this? Yes, no. What was the difference? The top-grade tea brewed and spun in Tang Yin's mouth, losing its original fragrance and becoming extremely bitter. Thinking quickly, Tang and naturally put down the teacup and shook his head. No, the sword god was not an ordinary person. When he had the intention to kill, any clever answer was in fact just a change of direction and a self-imposed trap. And between yes and no, the risk of no was naturally smaller. Of course, it was only relatively small. In fact, this was still an out-and-out sentence that determined life and death. After saying this, Tang In calmly met Wu Ding's gaze. His left hand was placed under the table without a trace, and the dagger in his sleeve trembled slightly, ready to be used. The atmosphere seemed to suddenly freeze at this moment, suffocating and cold. Wu Ding narrowed his turbid old eyes, not letting go of any subtle expression on Tang In's face. After a few breaths, he said non-committally, "Oh." Tang In pretended not to see and said, "This was given to me by a painter friend before he died." A painter? Wu Ding could not help but be surprised when he heard this. One must know that before he came, he had already inquired about all kinds of information about this channel in the body. If Tang In's answer was the news circulating on the market, which was from the Shanghai City Auction House, Wu Ding would definitely not believe it. This was because his old friend had spent more than 100 years flipping through all the ancient books and records in order to study this item. If there really was such a secret manual, it was impossible that he did not know about it. Yes, a painter who was in dire straits. Not sensing any fluctuation of killing intent, Tang In could not help but feel relieved. He then told Ghostface's story in detail. There was nothing to hide. Tang In could not take this on himself. He understood the principle of treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime, so he could only push it to Ghostface. Moreover, this was not completely a lie. Ghostface was the one who first discovered the Battle Chi circulation channel. Tang In was just using this opportunity to complete the follow-up work. Moreover, Ghostface was already dead. The dead naturally could not testify, so Tang In was very relieved after a long while. Tang In roughly repeated the contents of Ghostface's diary. "I see." Wu Ding was the first to retract his gaze. Regret, pity, joy, all kinds of complicated emotions flashed across his face. He nodded and sighed. "Little Tang, you're still young. Even if you're really a genius, you can't come into contact with this field. I'm overthinking." This was not because Wu Ding was not scheming and believed Tang In's words so easily. It was because this could not be hidden at all. Lion City, Ghostface's identity, the diary, and so on. These details could be easily checked, so there was no possibility of lying at all. However, Tang In curled his lips when he heard this. "TSK, you're looking down on me. Would I tell you if I had a full set of Battle Chi circulation channels?" Wu Ding naturally did not know what Tang In was thinking. He looked a little emotional. What a pity. "I'm sure you know the significance of these internal circulation channels to Battle Chi martial arts. If someone could really completely grasp the rules within, it would definitely have a revolutionary impact on the martial arts of this world. At that time, the martial saint realm would no longer be the peak of martial arts, and mages would no longer be able to suppress warriors of the same level." Pause for a while. He shook his head lightly, but this is also good. "If you really start to study this Battle Chi circulation channel, I can only choose to kill you now." Damn it. As expected, Tang In's heart trembled when he heard this. His back was instantly drenched in cold sweat, and his heart throbbed incessantly. Of course, on the surface, he still looked shocked and surprised. Oh, why? Wu Ding was frank. "Because it's too dangerous. You should know that although this internal circulation channel has extremely attractive prospects, it's just an empty dream right now. This is not a path that can be explored in one or a few generations. You're only taking out a few half-finished products now, and in this short period of time, it can make countless warriors go crazy. But who knows if they will be like that abject painter who will lose his mind and die for no reason in the end." This was where the problem lay. In the eyes of Wu Ding, who was concerned about Bran, the Battle Chi circulation channel in Tang In's hands was a revolutionary thing, and also the source of chaos. The key was that this channel was not complete. It was only a half-finished product with unknown dangers. and Tang and could not tell him that he had mastered the complete channel. In fact, there was indeed a problem with the channels that the warriors outside were learning. As long as Tang was willing, he could instantly create countless madmen in the world. This was an irreconcilable problem, and he would inevitably have to face some choices. Understood. Tang nodded. He narrowed his long and narrow eyes and looked at Wu Ding calmly. You mean, you can choose any 3 of the martial arts techniques in my sect, but you have to hand over all the battle chi channels in your body. Wu Ding's tone was equally calm and resolute, and unmoved by 10,000 mountains. Tang was silent. After a while, he raised his head. What if I don't hand them over? Chapter 866. What if I don't hand it over? His voice was not loud and his tone was calm. But when he heard this, Haita, who was standing by the door, was slightly stunned and then frowned. It was not narcissistic or boastful, because the truth was that there were not many people in the world who dared to go against his master's opinion. Even the high and mighty king of Bulin Kingdom, the powerful nobles, and so on, didn't they obediently give up the idea of getting their hands on the new marshal of the Purple Star Army just because of master's words? This Tang, and what was he thinking? Compared to Haita's shock, the members of the secret organization who were also guarding outside the door felt different. Of course, they knew that the inconspicuous old man sitting inside was the brand god of swords. But it was also because of this that they worshipped Tang, who dared to say no to the god of swords face to face. They clenched their fists, and their bodies trembled with excitement. F*CK, the boss is simply too fierce. In the hall, Wu Ding's expression was still calm, and there was no sign of anger. Well, at least on the surface, there was nothing wrong. After thinking for a while, he asked calmly, Is the price not enough? Yes. Tang did not deny it, and nodded as a matter of course. F*CK. The members of the secret organization outside the door subconsciously covered their faces when they heard this. They could not bear to look directly at him. Boss, oh boss, you can choose any 3 martial arts cultivation methods of the God of Swords faction. This price is not low, and anyone would be ecstatic. Well, you can say that it is not enough. However, could he not act so fearless and domineering just a moment ago, as if he was a fearless warrior? Now, all of a sudden, he had turned into the haggling face of a merchant. This change is too fast, and I can't bear it at all. Tang naturally did not know that his lofty image had collapsed. He continued, It is not that I am greedy, but I think you are also aware of the current situation in the north. The Temple of Light and I are like fire and water, and we will fight to the death. The reason why I can force the Temple of Light to this point is because of the circulation channels of the Do Chi. Now, although you're asking me to hand it over, it's not that I don't want to give you face, and it's also not that I look down on those 3 cultivation techniques. I only feel that I can find more worldly possessions, but my life, my brother's lives, and the lives of so many people under my command, all of them only have one life. Am I right? Wu Ding's eyes drooped slightly, as if he was deep in thought. Outside the hall, Haita sighed and nodded slightly. This was the reason. The Temple of Light hated Tang into the bone. Once he took back the killing weapon in his hand, countless warriors would disperse. The Temple of Light would definitely launch a crazy counterattack against him and the people around him. They would never give up. Alas, he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. This was troublesome, boss. At this time, the thoughts of the members of the secret organization changed again. They stared blankly at Tang and straight back. They suddenly felt that this figure, who used to be omnipotent, now looked so weak and weak. He was like a cicada's wings in the wind and rain, trembling but cautiously protecting everyone. Sorry, let's not talk about the complicated thoughts of the people outside the hall first. After pondering for a while, Wu Ding raised his eyes and said, The price still counts. In addition, you will follow me up the mountain as a guest. Well, follow me to my residence as a guest. How about it? Tang was stunned when he heard this, and then he quickly understood. He had to admit that this was indeed a good idea. Once Tang In became a guest of the Sword God Mountain, he would be the only guest. No matter how much the Temple of Light hated him, they would have to consider whether it was worth offending the Brand Sword God before making a move, of course. As long as their brains weren't short-circuited, they would know that it wasn't worth it after thinking about a little. After all, Wu Ding wasn't just a person in the pure sense. He was the Sword God. Starting a war with him was equivalent to starting a war with his hundreds of years of supreme prestige and influence. At that time, the brand would definitely be in chaos. However, Tang Yin thought for a while and simply shook his head. I thank you for your kindness in advance, but I'm sorry, I can only accept it. I have a reason why I have to stay here. Moreover, I'm not used to being sheltered by others and living an ignoble existence. After a pause, Wu Ding frowned slightly, as if he was displeased. Tang Yin glanced at him from the corner of his eyes, and his heart couldn't help but tremble. He then continued, Of course, if you can agree to one of my requests, I will immediately hand over those battle energy circulation channels with both hands. What request? Tang Yin blinked. It's very simple. Well, I heard that you don't have a good relationship with the Temple of Light. The real intention was revealed. This was Tang Yin's real request. He wasn't as great as the members of the secret organization thought. The previous statements and the weak posture were just to increase the bargaining chips in the negotiation. As for those battle energy circulation channels, Tang Yin didn't care at all. Anyway, there were problems. Since you want them, then take them. Of course, you have to pay a price, such as suppressing the Temple of Light with me, or something. After a few moments of silence, he suddenly laughed. Ha! Wu Ding shook his head and laughed. He looked at Tang Yin with a playful gaze. Interesting, you really dare to think. That was indeed too daring. Haitao also shook his head and smiled helplessly. You dare to provoke the two pillars of the Bran Empire, the Sword God and the Temple of Light, to fight. You really dare to think of this. Of course, Haida didn't think that his master would agree to this absurd proposal. The reason was as he said before. Compared to the Temple of Light, which had thousands of years of history, Tang Yin's power was still too small. In order to quickly stabilize the chaos in the north, there was naturally no need to think about which side to choose. Sure enough, Wu Ding rubbed his eyebrows and said with an ambiguous smile, I really don't have a good impression of the Temple of Light, but compared to this difficult bone to chew, killing you seems to be a better and simpler choice. His joking tone sounded like he was just casually saying it, but who could be sure that the Sword God's words didn't contain any true intentions? Tang Yin's expression didn't change. He also smiled and even nodded, as if he agreed with this view. Killing me is indeed the simplest solution. Well, why don't you try? Hearing this, Wu Ding finally raised his eyebrows in surprise. He no longer looked as calm as before and sized up Twain again. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't hear the provocation in these words, he would have pulled out his sword and cut down this audacious guy, so that he would know that the title of Sword God was not just for show. Without avoiding, Tang Yin directly looked into Wu Ding's eyes. Are you interested in making a bet with me? I'll take one move from you. If I die, then this matter is over. If I'm lucky enough to survive, the Do Chi circulation channel will still belong to you, but you have to go to the Temple of Light with me. How about that? Are you serious? Of course, my ass. With a sudden roar, Philip rushed in from outside the door. Haha, grandfather, don't mind him. I know this kid. There's something wrong with his brain. His words are like farts. They don't count at all. Philip waved his hand and said hurriedly while pulling Tang into the side. He looked agitated and scolded him. Are you King crazy? Take one move from my grandfather. Is that something a human can take? Even if you want to die, you don't have to die without any suspense. Calm down, don't be agitated. Tilting his head to avoid the flying spit, Tang Yin looked a little helpless. Looking for death? No, he was looking for a way to survive. In fact, Tang Yin really had no other choice now. Wu Ding came this time to make it clear that he wanted to quell the chaos in the north as soon as possible. And Tang Yin was the easiest to deal with, so naturally he was the target. So what could he do? obediently hand over the Do Chi circulation channels and follow Wu Ding up the mountain. He looked like a guest, but was actually a prisoner? No. Of course, Tang In was not willing. Not to mention that he couldn't stand the humiliation of living. He absolutely couldn't leave the north when the Gray Coat Army came out of the 100,000 Mountains soon. But the result of being unwilling was likely to anger Wu Ding. The killing intent he felt before was not fake. Once the negotiation failed, the brand god of swords wouldn't mind destroying him in exchange for peace in the north. So, Tang In took the initiative to propose this somewhat tricky proposal. One move, only one move. No matter what the result was, the chances of survival were much higher than falling out with Wu Ding and directly starting a war. And once this was done, with the god of swords as a powerful bodyguard, Tang In would definitely be able to turn the northern temple upside down. At that time, even if there was no Do Chi circulation channel, the temple's power in the north would be gone. And by the time they recovered, the Gray Coat Army would also come out, killing two birds with one stone. Thinking of this, Tang In patted the unusually excited Philip on the shoulder. Don't worry, have confidence in me. Bullshit, I only have confidence in you being killed in one move. Seeing that persuasion was useless, Philip took a step back and looked at Tang In as if he was looking at a dead man. He used his trump card. Well, I can't control you. If you want to die, go ahead. But don't worry, I will take good care of Josiah for you. F***CK off. In the end, Philip left the side hall. He couldn't help it. Even such a crazy trick like, I'll take care of your wife, didn't work. What else could he do? Helplessly, he could only leave with Hai Ta who brought the sword in. And after sending away this strange and bad friend, Tang In walked back to the table and looked at Wu Ding who stood up with the sword in his hand. He couldn't help but be stunned. You really use a sword? Wu Ding was also stunned when he heard this. He looked at the sheathed, long sword in his hand and asked inexplicably, Is there a problem? Of course there's no problem. Scratching his head, Tang In's mouth twitched, but he still said what he thought in his heart. I thought that a master like you would be unfathomable. For example, you can replace a sword with a finger, or you can hurt people with a flying flower or a leaf. Or you can pick up a drop of tea and flick it casually. You can quietly turn someone into ashes or something. I didn't expect you to really bring a sword. Touching his nose, this was indeed the master's demeanor that Tang In thought in his heart. Although it seemed a bit pretentious and somewhat disrespectful, Tang In really hoped that Wu Ding didn't respect him, because in that case, it would undoubtedly be much easier for him to deal with it. Wu Ding couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. Your way of saying it is novel and very interesting. As for the methods you mentioned, I'm barely capable of doing them. But if I use them to deal with you, I will have to admit defeat without a fight, huh? He shook his head and laughed. I have been using the sword all my life and have been immersed in it for more than 100 years. I believe that within 10 feet, the sword is invincible. Hee, it is somewhat similar to your concept of close combat. So except for holding the sword in my hand, I really haven't used any other means. I'm sorry to disappoint you, little Tang. It's nothing. In any case, you are still the brand sword god. The demeanor of a master is everywhere. Well, thank you for your guidance. Tang In was not stupid. Wu Ding's words seemed to be self-deprecating, but in fact he was secretly pointing out his own sword principle, which was equivalent to showing his trump card first. Although showing his trump card now had little impact on the outcome of this battle, this magnanimous attitude was undoubtedly worthy of respect. Hearing this, Wu Ding knew that Twain had understood his meaning, and he couldn't help but nod with a light smile, yet he sighed in his heart. How good would it be if this was my disciple? That's right, Wu Ding did have the intention of taking him as a disciple. But just like before when he wanted to give Tang In the guest status, Wu Ding knew that it was too late. Because whether it was in terms of Tang In's strength or fighting style, Wu Ding didn't feel that he could teach him anything, so he could only feel regret. It had to be said that the news of sword god Wu Ding wanting to accept a disciple was enough to shock the world. If this news were to spread, It would not take more than a few days for Wu Ding's small residence to be filled with martial practitioners from all over Bulin who would rush over to take him as their master. And if the news that Wu Ding felt that he didn't deserve to be the other party's master spread out, the countless martial artists who hurried over would definitely be petrified on the spot, and then curse the heavens and earth, complaining about the injustice of the gods, and going crazy with jealousy. Shaking his head slightly, Wu Ding looked outside and said, "I won't hold back this time, so you go first." Dispelling the distracting thoughts in his mind, he looked outside and finished clearing the area, and said, "Okay, now is not the time to be polite." Seeing that Wu Ding took the initiative to be polite, Tang In nodded honestly and bluntly. Then he slowly closed his eyes and silently chanted, "Haste, phantom, peeping, aura observation, heart like still water, killing intent," all the skills in the system's skill tree. As long as they could be used, Tang In activated them all, no matter how useless they were, no matter if they were suitable for the current environment or not. In an instant, Tang In felt his body become light, like a feather, and he couldn't bear any force. He slowly opened his eyes. In his almond-shaped pupils, everything was simplified into lines, and all the colors faded away like a tide, leaving only black and white. It felt quite strange. This was the first time Tang In crazily stacked skills like this, but it felt good, and he could clearly feel the amplification effect. Finally, Shadow, Doppelganger. With a swoosh, Tang In smiled at Wu Ding, and his figure suddenly flashed to the left and right at the same time. First, it was a series of phantoms, and then it completely disappeared into the air. If someone accidentally broke into this side hall at this time, he would only see an old man holding a sword standing beside the table. The side hall was silent, and Wu Ding didn't move. He just turned his head and looked around, slightly raising his eyebrows, faintly surprised. Of course, Tang In didn't leave this side hall. Although taking this opportunity to escape was also an option, one couldn't be so wretched, right? Cough, cough. Well, the actual reason was that it was useless for Tang Un to escape because he couldn't hide forever. And the reason why he couldn't see him now was because Tang In's speed was too fast, exceeding the limit that the naked eye could bear. Speed up, continue to speed up. Speed, still speed. With the motionless Wu Ding as the center, the two Tang In ran around crazily without a trace of wind, as if they didn't have any intention of attacking. And this was Tang In's strategy. Tang In never belittled himself, but he also wouldn't be arrogant. Although fighting with the sword god face-to-face sounded really cool, and it would make him proud, it was purely an act of seeking death. Therefore, Tang In didn't have any intention of attacking from the beginning, and he didn't even have the intention to make contact. Anyway, with Wu Ding's character, since he promised to only make one move, then he would never go back on his words. In this way, there was something to be done. Tang In decided to send his #1 suicide squad, which was the Shadow Doppelganger, to disturb the attack. As long as he could make Wu Ding stab with his sword once, then he would win. Well, no matter how he thought about it, it was a F***king smart move. Tang In laughed. Wu Ding also laughed. Although he couldn't see any trace of Tang In with his turbid old eyes, it didn't mean that he couldn't find him. His hand stroked the hilt of his sword. Little Tang, this time I'm the one who took advantage of you." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a swishing sound, and the green steel sword's body revealed a sharp edge from the plain black scabbard. In an instant, Tang In, who was running wildly, suddenly felt his hair stand on end, as if he saw a giant dragon's head suddenly poking out from the clouds, looking down on the world. The alarm in his heart rang nonstop, like a strange soul lullaby. Then, fear spread throughout his body, and he felt numb. This wasn't a killing intent, but a majestic sword intent that contained infinite killing intent. While running wildly, Twain no longer had the relaxed expression from before. He felt that he was not running in the side hall, but walking barefoot in the sword catacomb. His surroundings were as dense as hair, and the miniature swords that were as thin as needles were constantly cutting his body, dripping with blood. Damn it. He clenched his teeth, and his face was ferocious. Tang In cursed in his heart and instantly understood where the problem was. This was not a vast and boundless grassland, but a small side hall. In this area, Wu Ding could easily cover every corner with his sword intent and directly force him out. This was the reason why Wu Ding said that he had taken advantage of him. To be honest, this was not a mistake on Tang In's part. It could only be said that Wu Ding's strength was too abnormal, and Tang In's mistake was that he had zero experience fighting with such an abnormal master. Swish. The sword was pulled out another 3 inches. With a bang, more than 10 steps to the left of Wu Ding, Tang In, who was covered in blood, suddenly fell out of the void. His face was pale, and his footsteps were staggering. He looked extremely embarrassed. Wu Ding glanced at him, paused, and his eyes flashed. There was some doubt in his eyes, but there was also some appreciation and admiration. Then, he withdrew his gaze and pulled out the sword again as if he didn't see it. Damn it. It's over. That was naturally not the real Tang In, but a shadow doppelganger with part of Tang In's strength. Tang In originally thought that he could win this bet, but he didn't expect to be exposed now. Chapter 867. More than 100 meters outside the hall. It's over, it's over, it's over, it's over. I'm dead. I'm dead. I'm dead. Clapping his hands and pacing back and forth, Philip was like an ant on a hot pan, extremely restless. Retracting his gaze, Sita sighed helplessly. The results are not out yet. Philip, can you calm down a bit? How do you expect me to remain calm? What's the point of needing a result? You're dead meat. I'm not trying to nag at you, but you think you can solve problems with violence just because you have some strength? F***CK. Even if she's a prostitute, she still needs foreplay. She doesn't like to force herself on someone. Now look, Winston's arm is broken, and Tang In is going to die. You're all happy now. A bunch of idiots. Taking a deep breath, he said, by the way, what did you mean when you said that the results are not out yet? Could it be that there's still a chance to turn things around? Why aren't you saying anything? Even though Hai Ta was a good person, he couldn't help but roll his eyes. He took a deep breath and said with a frown, the result hasn't come out yet, which means that nothing is certain. This friend of yours is very strong. I can't see through him. Master once praised him as a genius. Moreover, the battle energy channels in his body and his unreasonable close combat skills, he might have other trump cards. Therefore, if I only receive 1 strike from Master, there might be a chance to turn things around. Philip grinned. What tunnel? What close combat? What a mess. Just give me a straight answer. How high is the probability of this turning point? I don't know. Sea Tower avoided Philip's expectant eyes and looked at the side hall again. Maybe you could try to pray for a miracle. Miracle? Philip's expression instantly darkened. Miracle my ass. Doesn't that mean we're still dead meat? Sea Pagoda was silent, and this was basically a tacit agreement. To be honest, even though Seda was comforting Philip, he didn't believe that a miracle would happen. Master was too strong. More importantly, his master had said that he could not make up his mind on how to deal with Tang In. Of course, cherishing talent was one of the reasons, but it also showed that the master had indeed had the intention to kill. Therefore, in a situation where there was only 1 strike left, his master would not hold back. Go all out and leave the outcome to fate. This should be Master's idea right now. It had to be said that although Hai Ta, as the eldest disciple, had the lowest talent, he was the one who understood Wu Ding the most. That was more or less the truth. Doesn't boss have any chance? What the hell? Philip waved his hand angrily. Suddenly, he paused and turned around. When he saw David with his injured arm in a sling, his expression changed. Then, he raised his head and laughed. Hey, David, where did you go just now? How was the injury on your hand? Are you all right? That was to use the instantaneous explosive force to suddenly draw the sword out of the sheath and attack directly at high speed, in order to create a one-hit kill effect. Tang In didn't know if the sword drawing technique was really so magical, but he thought that even if it was 100 times more magical, it would definitely not be as powerful as Wu Ding's sword drawing technique. His sword drawing technique was very slow, not as fast as the sword drawing technique. Because of this, the sword drawing technique didn't have the unexpected effect of a sneak attack. In fact, he didn't need such an effect. He drew the sword very openly, and every inch of the sword could be seen clearly. And what it brought was an unstoppable pressure that was as heavy as a thunderbolt from the mountains. In comparison, the sneak attack effect of the sword drawing technique was really shabby. It was like a grain of rice competing with the bright moon. It was laughable and not worth mentioning. At this time, Tang Yin felt that he had also become this laughable grain of rice. He couldn't hold on any longer. With a loud bang, Tang Yin, who was covered in blood, suddenly appeared beside the shadow doppelganger. He stomped the floor into powder, and soon after, huff, huff, his chest rose and fell rapidly like a broken bellows. Blood flowed quickly along the side of his feet, and he was in an extremely sorry state. At the same time, Wu Ding looked up, looked at him, and nodded with a smile. With a whoosh, a pleasant sound was heard, and the water-like sword was drawn directly. With a flick of his wrist, the shining sword drew a very standard circle in the air. In an instant, Tang Yin felt his body lighten, and the biting cold sword intent that was everywhere in the side hall disappeared instantly. No! Squinting his long and narrow eyes, Tang Yin looked at the long sword in Wu Ding's hand with great sensitivity. Sure enough, the sword intent didn't dissipate, but went into the sword like moths to a flame. Then, a layer of pale golden light appeared on the sword, flowing like water. After doing all this easily, Wu Ding took a step forward and appeared in front of Tang Yin as if he had shrunk the ground into an inch. Then, he calmly handed out the long sword. What followed was an overwhelming aura of death. At this time, Tang Yin's hands and feet were stiff, as if he was tied up by several invisible ropes, and he couldn't move. He was locked on by the sword intent. Roar! He raised his head ferociously and let out a shrill cry. After understanding this, Tang Yin stomped his feet heavily and instantly broke free from the lock of the sword intent. His figure flashed like a ghost, and he immediately dodged the long sword stab. In terms of pure speed, even someone as strong as sword god Wu Ding couldn't compete with Tang Yin directly. Of course, Wu Ding didn't care about this. He just turned around and locked his long sword on Tang Yin again. But this time, there was an additional shadow clone between the two. Attack! While retreating, Tang Yin waved his hand and gave the order. Without the suppression of the sword intent, the shadow clone didn't hesitate to wield the dagger and step forward. The bloody blade was like a flower, and it used its strongest attack, which was the chaotic flower skill, directly toward the long sword. Yes, it was the long sword, not Wu Ding. Tang Yin's goal had always been very clear. Whether it was dodging, deceiving, or blocking, as long as he could block this long sword, Tang Yin would win this move. As for Wu Ding, to be honest, it was very boring and meaningless to use him as a target. Pausing, Tang Yin stared at the intersection of the bloody dagger and the light golden longsword. In an instant, his vision blurred. There was a loud bang, and the hull creaked slightly. When he looked again, Wu Ding was standing in the field with the light golden longsword in his hand, looking calm. And the shadow clone that had a part of Tang Yin's strength had disappeared at some point. Puff! Opening his mouth and bending his waist, Tang Yin clutched his chest tightly, grabbing the 5 bloody marks, trying to use the intense pain to suppress the pain in his body. With the increase of his level, the shadow clone had become more and more useful, but its side effects were equally obvious. That was, once the clone was injured, Tang Yin's main body would also be injured. It was like a double-edged sword, hurting others and hurting oneself. Wu Ding didn't follow up with another attack. Instead, he stood in place, and there was some surprise in his eyes. With his current strength and knowledge, there weren't many unfamiliar martial arts that could make him puzzled. But the shadow clone just now made him feel very strange and novel. Wu Ding knew that the shadow clone was fake before, but he couldn't figure out whether it was an illusion or something like a puppet. Later, when he saw that it didn't disappear for a long time under the sword intent, and even got injured, he thought that it should be a puppet. It wasn't until the fight just now that Wu Ding had felt a real impact that Wu Ding confirmed his conjecture. But then the clone disappeared into thin air, which made him somewhat confused, saying it was an illusion, but it had the physical touch of a puppet. Saying it was a puppet, but it had the characteristic of disappearing into thin air. What kind of martial arts was this? Was this a martial arts technique? Well, no matter what it was, he had to thank the shadow clone. This made Wu Ding puzzled and surprised, but it also bought time for Tang to cast his skills. Hiss, hiss, hiss. It was as if a whirlwind suddenly surged into the side hall, and then blood-red blade lights suddenly appeared out of thin air. 1 became 2, 2 became 4. They spun rapidly, cutting through space, and completely covered Tang En's figure in a short moment. When Wu Ding came back to his senses from his thoughts, he saw a small blood-red hurricane forming in the middle of the hall. Under the strong wind, the brown tables and chairs drew lines on the floor, and they quickly crashed into the corners of the walls. There were loud bangs, mixed with the crisp sound of teacups falling to the ground, and it was chaotic for a moment. Storm, the strongest attack skill that Tang En could use now. At this point, Tang En also knew that there was absolutely no other way except to face it head-on. If he still held on to the idea that he was lucky, he would definitely die. The corners of his mouth rose slightly. Wu Ding naturally did not know that Tang En had changed his mind. He only felt that Tang En was becoming more and more interesting. Another martial arts technique that he had never seen before. With great interest, Wu Ding looked at the blood-red hurricane that was becoming more and more bloated. He raised his long sword and stepped forward to meet it. In an instant, as soon as the light golden long sword approached, the blood-red blade lights that were spinning rapidly outside the hurricane slashed together, constantly hitting the sword. Sparks flew everywhere, and the dense collision sounds were immediately incessant. Some of the blood-red blades were directly annihilated and shattered, and some were bounced back, shattering the surrounding windows and leaving deep marks on the thick stone walls. The scene was spectacular for a moment. Unfortunately, although the blood-red hurricane was becoming more and more destructive, Wu Ding still raised his sword and advanced. In front of the bloated blood-red hurricane that was connected to the ground and the ceiling, Wu Ding's sword-wielding figure seemed so small. But it was such a small figure that blocked the hurricane's path and walked in neither hurriedly nor slowly. Around the light golden long sword, those blood-red blades were still attacking one after another, like brave warriors who did not fear death. But what could they do when they were facing a heavily armored chariot that was armed to the teeth this time? After colliding with it, not only were they unable to stop it from advancing, they were also killed, and their bodies were smashed to pieces. This strange scene could not help but give rise to an illusion. The long sword in Wu Ding's hand was like a hot poker, and this seemingly huge blood-red hurricane was actually just a bubble that looked strong on the outside, but was weak on the inside. When the two collided, the bubble burst upon contact and was extinguished upon contact. It was completely unable to withstand a single blow. Very quickly, as Wu Ding continued to advance and was about to reach the center, the blood-red hurricane was the first to collapse. A loud boom suddenly sounded, and the previously orderly rotating hurricane became a barrel of gunpowder. In a short instant, countless blood-red blades scattered chaotically, and light and shadow flickered. And this side hall that had already been repeatedly destroyed finally could not withstand such a violent blow and collapsed with a rumble. Dust flew everywhere, and it was just like the scene of a disaster. In the moment before this violent explosion, a figure was flung out from the center of the hurricane like a broken sack. His hands hugged his head, and his body curled up. Blood dripped from his body as he heavily smashed into the side of the wall, drawing countless spiderweb-like cracks. Cough, cough. As he coughed, he spat out the blood in his chest. If he disregarded the maddening pain at this moment, Tang and only felt that his body was empty, as if all his internal organs and flesh had been completely spat out. Without waiting for him to recover, a pair of gray cloth shoes suddenly appeared in front of him. Tang Yin slowly raised his head and saw a calm-looking Wu Ding holding the light golden sword, coming in front of him. He still looked the same, and there was no change at all. Even the corners of his clothes were not wrinkled. It was as if the huge power of the explosion of the blood-red hurricane did not happen on his body. Ha! Silently, he grinned and laughed at himself. It was only now that Tang Yin finally understood how laughable the previous bet was. The sword god was after all a sword god. Even if he used all his means, he still could not withstand an unremarkable long sword. Wu Ding did not smile, although it seemed that he only needed to hand out the long sword and easily win this bet. There was no joy in his heart. However, he didn't feel happy at all. On the contrary, there was pity in his eyes. It was as if he was looking at a flawless piece of jade that was about to shatter. Without saying anything, Wu Ding only shook his head slightly and bent over to hand out the light golden sword. Cherishing talent is cherishing talent, but in the face of right and wrong, Wu Ding will not make mistakes. Alas, I just hope that you will not be too resentful. If you agree to bet, you must accept defeat. Since you have thought it through, you should leave. With this thought, Wu Ding stabbed the light golden sword towards Tang Yin's heart on the left side of his chest, wanting to give him a painless death. But at this moment, suddenly, "Ha, come into my bowl." The dying Tang Yin suddenly grinned and leaned against the wall. His shoulders were straight, his hands were placed across his chest, and his fingers were bent into claws, one above and one below, just enough to encircle the light golden sword. What's the use of this? Seeing this, Wu Ding was slightly surprised, but the movement of his hand did not stop. He continued to stab towards Tang Yin's heart without any hindrance. The long sword stopped in midair, and Wu Ding exclaimed with a puzzled expression. According to the length of the long sword, it should have pierced through the opponent's heart. But why was there no physical touch from the sword? Wu Ding's first reaction was that he had encountered the strange martial art again, but then he found that something was wrong. He saw a gradually expanding black crack between Tang Yin's palms, like a mouth, accurately biting his light golden sword. Stunned, Wu Ding's face was full of shock, and he could not help but exclaim softly, "Space magic. No, it's tearing space." The former belonged to the category of a space magician, and the latter was the ability of a warrior. With his palms trembling, Tang Yin nodded and chuckled. "Ha! Elder Wu is knowledgeable. Space magic." This was Tang Yin's trump card to save his life. When he knew that he could only resist Wu Ding's attack head-on, Tang Yin had been thinking about how to resolve this almost unbreakable sword. Or to be more precise, how to remove that faint layer of golden light. Wu Ding promised to only make one move, so if this golden light dissipated, it would be equivalent to Tang Yin winning. After thinking about it for a while, Tang Yin naturally decided to focus on his strongest ability, which was the spatial ability. As long as he could successfully tear open the space crack and encircle the light golden sword, with the powerful attractive force in the space, he should be able to suck away this layer of light golden sword. Of course, although the idea was good, there was still a problem. That was, Tang Yin's strength was still too weak compared to Wu Ding's. If he acted rashly, not only would he not be able to encircle the long sword, he might even suffer a backlash. This was like eating a meal. Of course, rice could be chewed and swallowed smoothly, but what if it was a stone in the rice? Wouldn't his teeth be broken? For this reason, Tang Yin made two attempts. One was to order the shadow clone to attack, and the other was to use the storm skill head-on. The results of these two attempts seemed to be a fiasco, but in fact it was not. Although Wu Ding's light golden light was extremely domineering, and all things were easily repelled. But as long as it was still Do Qi after receiving a strong attack, it would always be consumed. Tang Yin's idea was to consume the Do Qi. As long as the power of the light golden light was weakened, he could tear open the space crack and encircle the long sword. And in fact, he succeeded. Chapter 868. P.S. Raccoon has something to do today. This is a fixed chapter, still 5,000. Still asking for subscriptions. Outside, the side hall collapsed with a loud bang, causing dust to rise everywhere. Philip, who was squatting on the ground and holding his head, suddenly stiffened when he heard the sound. He subconsciously raised his head and looked at the messy ruins, his eyes silent and desperate. He paused for a moment. Then with a bang, he abruptly leaped out. Obviously, in Philip's opinion, the battle was over. As for the result, he now only hoped that Tang could still be alive. If he was rescued in time, he could still save his little life. But, come back. With an urgent shout, Haita's expression suddenly changed. His figure flashed, and his left hand quickly clasped Philip's shoulder. At the same time, he raised his right hand, and with a soft hum, the broad and thick sword was instantly unsheathed. He stepped forward and swung his arm, slashing at the empty space in front of him. F***CK. Philip, who was in a hurry to save people, was held in place and could not move. He did not even think about it, and was about to curse out loud. But in an instant, his eyes shrank as he looked at the path of the heavy sword slash. Several indiscernible blood-colored blade lights silently broke through the air and rapidly attacked. He immediately shut his mouth. The next moment, bang, 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 the wind overflowed, and the sound of dense collisions was endless. Needless to say, this was naturally the aftermath of Tang Un's blood-colored hurricane. But although it was the aftermath, not everyone had the strength of Haita. Fortunately, this place had been cleared in advance, so no one from the secret agency was unlucky enough to die under Tang Un's blade. Only the surrounding buildings, walls, and so on suddenly collapsed as if they were made of flour. Gravel splashed and dust tumbled. It was like a small-scale earthquake, and the scene was spectacular for a moment. Philip opened his mouth and swallowed hard. He retracted his gaze and looked at Haita beside him. "Thank you. What's the situation?" Shaking his head, Haita solemnly stared at the messy ruins. Finally, his gaze fell on a half-collapsed wall, which was the only thing that was still standing in the side hall. After a moment of hesitation, he seemed to have thought of something. With a shocked expression, he said dryly, "The battle isn't over yet." Philip couldn't help but stare blankly when he heard this. When he came to his senses, a feeling of shock and excitement that was mixed with great surprise and disbelief slowly rose from the bottom of his heart. It was a very simple conjecture. That terrifying power just now was obviously an act of desperation. Logically speaking, this was also the time to determine the victor. Of course, the sword god wouldn't lose, but why hadn't he come out from the ruins yet? The battle wasn't over yet. Could it be that there was still a chance to turn things around? What Philip could think of, Sea Tower could naturally think of as well. Therefore, this middle-aged man who had accompanied the sword god and stood at the peak of the world for decades was much more shocked than the former. He had always felt that the only thing in the world that could defeat his master was time. But now, a strong thought began to stubbornly circle in his heart. Master will lose? The surroundings were silent. The two of them, who were still in shock, didn't know that they had actually walked through the gates of hell in an abandoned house on the right. Seeing the eaves of the side hall suddenly disappear outside the fence, David and the dozens of people who were kneeling on one knee shook their arms at the same time. If it wasn't for the fact that Luke, who was observing from the roof, hadn't made a clear signal, the dozens of purple cannons would have roared in unison. At such a close range, it was hard to say if the sword god Wu Ding would be able to dodge, but it would be difficult for Haita and David to dodge at that moment behind the half-collapsed wall. Leaning against the wall, Tang raised his head and narrowed his eyes. Wu Ding bent over and handed over the sword, narrowed his eyes, and lowered his head. They were like two petrified statues, motionless. Suddenly, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Their clothes fluttered with a piercingly cold wind, as if a strong wind had suddenly appeared on the ground, blowing without end. He shook his head. I didn't expect that the concept of close combat could be used in the spatial domain. Looking at the front part of the sword that had been swallowed by the black spatial crack, Wu Ding restrained his surprise and looked at Tang In with even more admiration. You're a great talent. What a pity. If you had been born a few decades earlier, I don't think I would have been so lonely. Tang In was stunned when he heard that. Shock flashed across his face, and he looked at Wu Ding with even more admiration. He shook his head and said with a smile, I'm very glad that I came a little later. Otherwise, it would have been a nightmare for me to be your opponent. It had to be said that Wu Ding's insight was truly astonishing. He had pointed out Tang Un's cultivation concept and the power of space. That was right, he did use close combat methods. Given Wu Ding's realm, he was naturally no stranger to the spatial domain. As long as he was willing, he could release his fighting energy and swing his sword, and immediately collapse a large area of space. However, in the final analysis, these were all effects that could be achieved through violence. Although the power was sufficient, it was not precise enough. It was very difficult to be like Tang In, who could easily and precisely tear a certain size of narrow space. And this was the result of Tang Un's cultivation of close combat. He had absolute control over a small area. The rustling sound continued. In just a short time of 2 sentences, the sudden strong wind seemed to have increased in intensity. Tang In's hair and Wu Ding's white beard were flying nonstop. In fact, this was of course not the effect of the wind, because if the two of them were unwilling, no matter how strong the wind in the world was, it would not be able to lift the corners of their clothes. This was the powerful suction force of the spatial rule, which was caused by the expanding black crack in the front part of the sword. Quickly come to the bowl. This was just the prelude to Tang Un's plan. It should be known that Wu Ding's strength was amazing, and that light golden sword was even more terrifying. If there was no other backup plan, even if Tang In succeeded in encircling the sword into the spatial crack, it would be impossible to trap it. And from the looks of it now, this so-called backup plan was naturally the powerful suction force produced after tearing the space apart. In other words, since it had already entered the bowl, it would not be able to get out of course with Wu Ding's strength. Even if the suction force was strong, he could still get rid of it if he wanted to. But in that case, he would need to use other forces again. And in this way, it would be tantamount to breaking the promise of this one move. Wu Ding was not Tang Un. Of course, he would not be so tasteless. Holding the sword hilt that was gradually sliding into the spatial crack, he sighed softly. I've used this sword for more than 100 years. It's very convenient. I don't want to throw it away. Please. The corner of his mouth twitched. Tang In advised very seriously. After all, it's just a worldly possession. If you really can't bear to part with it, no matter how much it costs, I'll definitely make an identical one for you. Huh. Wu Ding could not help but laugh happily when he heard this. He shook his head and looked at Tang In with a smile that was not a smile. No wonder Philip will become friends with you. You're really shameless. TSK, is Philip really your grandson? Smacking his lips, Tang In licked his lips and continued. Actually, my biggest shortcoming is that I like to speak the truth. The sword god was after all a sword god. Even if the suction force was incomparably strong, one should not forget that the extremely overbearing pale golden light on the sword was still there. Therefore, even if he did not use any other forces and directly ignited the pale golden light, the outcome of this battle was still unknown. As for the reluctance to throw away the sword, it was actually just an excuse. Since the bet had been made, Wu Ding's idea was just as Hai Ta had expected. He would go all out and then leave the outcome to fate. After a few words of ridicule, Wu Ding looked at Tang Un's trembling arms that were completely wrapped in a dense bloody light and nodded slightly. This seemingly wasted half a minute of conversation time was, in fact, Wu Ding wanted Twain to be more prepared, to be in his best condition, and to be at his strongest. Because what came next was the crucial moment of life and death. His old palm tightened, and the sword that was gradually being swallowed by the space crack stopped in midair. Wu Ding met Tang Un's somewhat nervous eyes and calmly said, "Explode." On the sword, the pale golden light that flowed like water suddenly stagnated. In the next moment, the golden light was released, dazzling and resplendent. Even the dark space that was said to be able to swallow everything could not stop this extremely brilliant golden light from blooming. In an instant, Tangen's vision was blank. Tears blurred his vision, and his eyes seemed to be ruthlessly pierced by countless fine needles, causing him to go crazy from the pain. But even so, Tangen still opened his eyes to the maximum, lowering his head to stare at the space between his palms. There, strangely, no explosion could be heard. He could only vaguely see the dazzling golden light spreading continuously. The space crack that was slowly expanding before suddenly expanded rapidly, as if it had suddenly taken drugs. In an instant, it expanded the space between Tang-Un's palms by 1 foot. Vaguely, from this space cave, countless black streams could be seen madly surging, like a group of snakes swimming around. It could not help but make one's hair stand on end. At the periphery, at the edge of the space crack, countless small cracks suddenly appeared on the originally lip-shaped arc under the influence of the spreading golden light. It was like a rotten tomato, as if it would completely burst open in the next moment. Space was stable. Even if it carried countless mountains, rivers, people, insects, birds, beasts, and so on, it was still stable and unmoving. Space was also the most unstable. Even if it was just an insignificant pinhole crack, it would not recover on its own. Instead, it would expand infinitely and create turbulence. Tang now felt like he was holding an exploding crystal that was about to shatter. The slightest movement would cause him to be smashed to pieces. But if he stayed still, it would still explode after it completely shattered. How should he choose? Tang moved. This seemingly difficult choice did not need to be considered at all for him, because he had never been a person who would sit and wait for death. Blue veins bulged on his arms and wrists. The dense blood light and real blood flowed down his arms and fingers like several streams, continuously flowing down until it completely occupied the periphery of the space crack and met with the spreading golden light. When two armies confronted each other, there was no need to sound the drums. No need to probe, just charge and entangle. The current situation was extremely clear. If this golden light was allowed to spread without limit, it would expand and expand the space crack until it completely covered Tang-Un's body. Then, what awaited Tang-Un was no doubt that he would be completely engulfed, drawn into countless turbulence in space, and nothing would be left in an instant. Of course, this was not the result that Tang-Un wanted to see. Therefore, he tried his best to mobilize the blood light to chase and intercept, intending to completely trap the golden light in the space crack. Ever since he obtained the blood energy, Tang-Un could vaguely gain the upper hand when fighting with countless battle energy warriors in the other world. In front of the blood energy that had multiple characteristics such as amplification, defense penetration, and internal invasion, the monotonous battle energy of the other world could not resist at all and was quickly defeated. But now, in front of the dazzling golden light, the defeated side became the blood energy. This did not mean that Tang-Un's blood energy was inferior to Wu Ding's battle energy, but only that there was a gap in the realm between the two. For example, the golden radiance was like an elite heavy-armored cavalry, while the blood radiance was like an ordinary infantryman wearing wooden armor and wielding a saber. The difference between the two was obvious, and the result of the battle was obvious. Fortunately, the bloodlight also had a little advantage, and that was their large number. The number of Wu Ding's golden light was fixed, while the blood energy that gushed out of Tang-Un's body seemed to be inexhaustible. It was like a fresh army that joined the battle one after another. A batch of dead? That's no big deal. Just send another 2 batches. Can't win in a one-on-one fight? No problem, we can fight together. Although it was exciting to be a solo assassin, it was actually a little boring after a long time. Sometimes, Tang-Un would imagine such a scene. He would stand behind the crowd, waving his arms and shouting righteously. There's no need to talk about morality with such shameless people. Brothers, go and kill them directly. Then a group of experts would die just like that. This scene was too beautiful, and he did not dare to look at it. But what Tang Yin did not expect was that he would actually see such a scene one day. It was just that the crowd had become his blood energy, and the enemy experts had become the golden battle energy. But it did not matter. The feeling was the same cool. Ha! Slowly drawing out his cyan steel sword, Wu Ding looked at the fierce battle at the edge of the space crack, unlike the excited Tang Yin, and could not help but frown slightly. Wu Ding had already expected that his battle energy was overbearing and powerful, and the opponent's battle energy had the advantage in terms of numbers. But the stalemate in front of him, and even the somewhat declining scene on his side, was somewhat beyond his expectations. This was not a simple battle of numbers, nor was it a pure battle of numbers. Wu Ding's eyesight was so sharp that he could see the problem at a glance. The battle energy that seemed to be chaotic and swarming was actually divided into 10 separate forces, according to the 10 fingers. It was like a real army that cooperated with each other, advancing and retreating according to the rules, and their power was greatly increased. In this way, his battle energy that was like a swarm of bees was naturally at a disadvantage. Well, thinking about Tang On's attainments in close combat, it made sense that he had such fine control. But Wu Ding narrowed his eyes and saw with his own eyes that a battle energy that was about to break out of the encirclement was suddenly drowned by a large number of battle energy at the most critical moment. This was not a coincidence, but a common scene that often appeared in the current battle. There had never been a mistake. Such perfect control of the battle. Subconsciously looking up, Wu Ding was stunned to see Tang Yin with his eyes wide open and his expression focused. Could it be that he was also an outstanding general? Tang Yin was, of course, not an outstanding military strategist. Saying that he was an armchair strategist was flattering him. And the reason why this scene that shocked Wu Ding appeared was because of his abnormal ability to have absolute control over a small area. It was like playing chess. The rules were fixed, and so was the range. What Tang Yin had to do was to see the various changes in between and then react according to the situation. There was no doubt that this was exactly what he was best at. Lost, Wu Ding had just thought of this when suddenly, with a joyful laugh, as if relieved of a heavy burden, Tang Yin shook his arms and instantly cut off the supply of battle energy. At the same time, his back directly smashed into the half-collapsed wall. With a bang, he jumped back with all his strength. In the same place, the black hole that was the size of a wash basin floated quietly, neither expanding nor shrinking. At the edge, the battle energy that had no support and no command was instantly covered by the golden light, and the entire line was defeated. From the beginning, Tang Yin had never thought of completely eliminating the golden light. Not to mention whether he could do it or not. It was meaningless. What he wanted was to temporarily stabilize the black hole. Even if it was only for a second, it was enough for him to escape. The next moment, Tang Yin, who was retreating rapidly, blinked. He did not know if it was because he had stared at the golden light for too long, or because he had lost too much blood and was hallucinating, but Tang Yin suddenly felt that the scene in front of him was somewhat distorted and deformed. It was as if he was looking at something through a piece of crystal glass that had many spiderweb-like cracks and was on the verge of shattering. Some became bigger, some became smaller, some were bent, and some were directly a pure black that could even swallow his vision. Everything seemed so strange and absurd. Then, the only half-collapsed wall that was still standing suddenly rippled like a tide. Fine debris and gravel fell, but before they fell to the ground, they suddenly disappeared in mid-air. That's right, they completely disappeared, not shattered into powder. Nothing could be seen with the naked eye. With a shiver, Tang Yin came back to his senses in an instant, and his heart was full of horror. This is not a problem of vision. This is the space turbulence. As soon as this thought came into his mind, the half-collapsed wall suddenly disappeared in place, as if it had never existed. Tang Yin knew in his heart that the broken wall did not disappear, but was swept into the black hole by the space turbulence, and became floating garbage in the lonely space corridor. There was no need to think about it appearing in the world. Without the broken wall, the rapidly expanding black hole behind him became the most eye-catching thing. However, Tang In did not look at it, but stared at Wu Ding at the side. His vision suddenly returned to normal. Wu Ding did not change at all. His expression was still indifferent, and the turbulent clothes from before had also calmed down. In the surrounding absurd and strange environment and the crazy dark space turbulence, his upright figure was like an eternal space coordinate, firmly fixed there. With a loud bang, Tang In fell heavily on a pile of ruins and then rolled down. The last image in his mind was Wu Ding turning his head to look at the black hole and waving his long sword, ignoring the messy injuries on his body. Tang In shook his head and looked up. On the messy ruins, the black hole, turbulence, absurd scene, and so on had all disappeared. Only Wu Ding put his sword back into the sheath, turned his head, paused, and slowly said in a calm voice, even stunned Tang In grinned. Bloodlines hung from his teeth, and Tang In showed the most brilliant smile in his life. Ha, I won. Chapter 869. Ha, I won. As the words fell, the ruins were in a mess, and the surroundings were silent. What was a miracle? It was the kind of thing that seemed like even if you tried 100 times, 10,000 times, you would still die 100 times, 10,000 times. But when you really did it, you accidentally stepped on dog shit and inexplicably succeeded. Yes, this was completely unscientific, but unfortunately, this was the truth. Moreover, let's not talk about whether there was really so much dog shit in this world. What was certain was that once a miracle happened, it would inevitably be followed by broken eyeballs. Philip's eyeballs didn't shatter, but they were bulging out a little. He felt that there must be something wrong with his ears. Otherwise, why would the two sentences "you win" and "I win" sound so unreal? It was as if he was listening to a story or a fairy tale at that. After a while, he grabbed his hair with both hands, and his expression collapsed. This doesn't make sense. Of course, this was not a curse. Philip and Tang Un had a good relationship. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come all the way here to inform him. But relationship was relationship, prayer was prayer. As long as he hadn't completely lost his reason, he still had to respect the facts. But now reality had given him a hard slap in the face. Looking at Twain, who was lying on the ruins with a face full of pride and even a somewhat unconcealable arrogance, Philip rubbed his hair and scalp, unable to accept it for a moment. Since he was like this, Haita on the side was naturally even worse. When he saw his master sheath his sword and admit that the other side had won, his mind exploded. His master had lost, his master had actually lost, and so on. Even with his void rank cultivation base, he didn't notice David and the others rushing into the field while laughing wildly. In the distance, mournful whistles sounded one after another, followed by the sound of hurried horse hooves. In fact, the battle between Tang In and Wu Ding didn't cause a lot of noise, and it didn't match their strength at all. If it weren't for Tang In taking the initiative to detonate the bloody hurricane at the end, which instantly collapsed a large number of surrounding buildings, the cavalry wouldn't have received the news and immediately rushed over. The battle was over, and the bet was set. Both sides had nothing more to say. Seeing Twain covered in blood, Wu Ding nodded and left with Sea Tower after saying, "Come find me when you're healed." As for Philip, after regaining his senses, he let out a strange cry and pounced forward with David and the others. "Where are you hurt?" "Boss, where are you hurt?" "Move aside. I'll contact the doctor. The doctor's healing process is too slow." "Boss, wait for me. I'll kidnap the priest from the church for you." Everyone was talking at once. Tang In, who was surrounded in the middle, failed to interrupt several times. He could not help but be stunned. In fact, David and the others couldn't be blamed for being so agitated. Of course, they knew how abnormal Tang In's body was. But his opponent this time was Wu Ding, the sword god. If he brushed against him, he would definitely be sent to meet the god of light, let alone fight Wu Ding for a long time. "Shut up, cough, cough." Tang In waved his hand and was about to shout to calm the crowd. Unexpectedly, he spat out a mouthful of blood that had been brewing in his throat for a long time. He immediately coughed repeatedly and was in a sorry state. His miserable appearance undoubtedly worried David and the others even more. Luke leaned over impatiently and was about to unbutton Tang's clothes to check, but Tang glared at him and slapped him away. "I say, you're still trying to be brave at a time like this." No way." After a pause, Philip, who had squeezed through the crowd, seemed to have thought of something and had a strange expression on his face. "Could it be that he's injured?" As soon as he said that, there was a sudden silence. David and the others reacted. They opened their mouths and secretly glanced at Tang's lower abdomen. The atmosphere was extremely strange for a moment. F***CK. Get lost. Tang, who had finally regained his strength, almost choked when he heard that. In an instant, he flipped over like a carp and flew into a rage. "You're the one who's F***king injured. Your whole family is injured." This was a matter of happiness. No man could tolerate it. Listening to this energetic shout, Philip couldn't be bothered to retort. He sized up Tang and paused for a moment. "Tang, are you all right?" He rolled his eyes. "Why? You seem disappointed?" Of course not." Philip avoided Tang's gaze a little guiltily. After all, he had thought of Josiah just now, or he wouldn't have instantly thought of that weird injury. With a whoosh, the members of the gray space were excited. "Boss, are you really all right?" F***CK. "Boss, you're too fierce." That is sword god. Looking at the lively Tang, everyone's mood was like a roller coaster. They went from extreme worry to extreme ecstasy and instantly cheered like thunder. Tang was indeed fine. Other than excessive blood loss, his two bony arms were a little scary. It was caused by controlling the expanding space crack. However, from the beginning to the end, Wu Ding's domineering sword did not touch him at all. In this way, naturally, there was no need to talk about injuries. It had to be said that luck played a large part in this result. Wu Ding did not hold back. If it was another person, even if he had the same strength as Tang, he would have died without a doubt. Because it was impossible for him to have the assistance of the system. "Since you're fine, what are you waiting for?" Philip raised his arms and suggested with a laugh. "Let's celebrate. The tavern in the city, my treat." "Okay." David immediately agreed. Then he suddenly bowed to Philip and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, brother. I'll toast you 3 times later to ask for forgiveness." "Ask for forgiveness? Why?" Philip was puzzled. It's nothing. In any case, we'll leave after drinking." Patting Philip's shoulder, Luke gave David a look and changed the topic. The so-called asking for forgiveness was naturally because David and the others had been planning to take revenge. It had to be noted that the purple cannon in the abandoned house next door was still aimed at them. If something had really happened to Tang just now, David and the others would have definitely chosen to bombard them with a cannon. It was hard to say what would happen to Sword God, but Sea Tower and Philip would probably not have a good ending. It wasn't that David and the others had to kill Philip. It was just that they had completely lost their minds at the time. All they could think about was that Sea Tower was Sword God's first disciple and Philip was Sword God's descendant. No matter how they thought about it, the two of them couldn't get away with it. So what if they killed them with one shot? Of course, it was already in the past, and it was naturally inappropriate to mention these things again. Wait. At that moment, Tang suddenly waved his hand to stop the jubilant crowd and stared at Philip with an unfriendly expression. "We'll talk about the drinking later. Let's talk about Josiah first. What was that sentence you said earlier?" Philip was stunned when he heard that. He blinked and raised his head to laugh. Suddenly, he slapped his thigh. "Oh, I suddenly remembered that grandfather is looking for me. Well, let's meet again next time. See you. As he waved his hand hurriedly, he was about to turn around and run away. But before he could rush out of the crowd, Tang gritted his teeth and shouted, "Stop him. This drink is on me. I won't let it go until he can't take care of himself today." "Okay," Harry replied with a smile, and blocked Philip with Luke from the front and the back. "Hey, what are you doing? I really have something to do." "Hey." The garrison cavalry is here. Don't mess around. Help, kidnap. Amidst the miserable screams, Tang En looked away expressionlessly, looking at the cavalry galloping over in the distance. He waved his hand and led everyone away from the rear. When they walked out of the secret agency that had already been reduced to ruins. Right, do something for me now. Leaning toward David, Tang En said, hide here and stop all missions related to the temple. Don't spread the battle energy circulation channel either. Then send a letter to the Northern Temple in my name and say that I'll be visiting in a week. Tell them to be prepared. David was stunned when he heard that. Boss, it's okay, just do what you need to do. This time, we're going to play big. Tang En narrowed his eyes and smiled meaningfully. Haha, I just hope that their preparations won't disappoint me. Okay. Without asking any more questions, David nodded and was about to leave. Wait, huh? Hugging David's shoulder, Tang En said in a low voice, spend some time and put in some effort. Find me the ugliest woman in the city. When Philip gets drunk later, we'll throw him on his bed. Isn't that too cruel? Rubbing his chin, he asked, very cruel. Very cruel. That's right. Go do it. At the end of the street in the distance, Wu Ding, who had left first, was in a rare daze as he brushed past the garrison cavalry. Of course, it wasn't because he knew what kind of miserable fate his grandson would meet later, but because he was thinking about something else. Master. 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 Haida, who was also in a daze, took a deep breath and paused for a moment before she said hesitantly, about the bet. Wu Ding turned his head in surprise and said, of course it's a bet. Is there a problem with that? No, it's just that, well, with Master's identity, if we really fight with the temple, the result may be... Speaking of this, Haida looked very worried. And we also have to consider the attitude of the Brand Palace. Once something goes wrong, not only the North, but the whole Brand will be in a mess. Isn't this contrary to our purpose of coming here? Well, you're wrong about this. Wu Ding shook his head. Tang En is not a fool. He knows where our bottom line is. He won't make excessive demands. I guess he's just thinking about the temple headquarters in the north. After a pause, a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Well, I've been unhappy with them for a long time. Don't forget, no one knows that we went down the mountain quietly. As long as we dress up a little, we can use this opportunity to teach the temple a lesson and vent our anger. Haida was stunned when he heard this, and then looked at Wu Ding suspiciously. Did Master already have such a plan? He couldn't be blamed for having such thoughts. Wu Ding's reaction was too abnormal, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Haha, I can only say that it's fate. Wu Ding waved his hand and didn't admit it, but this answer undoubtedly explained something. At this point, Haita puckered his lips, and he naturally couldn't say anything else. And as the eldest disciple of the Sword God's faction, Haida's impression of the temple was naturally not good. If there was a chance to bring some trouble to the temple, of course, he wouldn't refuse. But thinking of this, Haida naturally remembered the battle just now. Master, did you lose on purpose just now? Master? What? Wu Ding rubbed his eyebrows and seemed to be a little absent-minded. Haida couldn't help but feel sour in his heart when he saw this. He only thought that his master had tasted defeat for the first time in his old age. So his mind was fluctuating, so he was a little absent-minded all the way. He lowered his head and didn't ask any more of his previous doubts. However, Wu Ding had already remembered Haida's question when he came back to his senses. He didn't have any special expression and calmly replied, No, I did go all out just now, but I used the wrong fighting method. When Tang En fought with Wensilin, he showed amazing close combat attainments. But I don't think that was his limit, and Wensilin couldn't force him to use his full strength. So when I used that sword, I compressed my Do Chi just to see how big of a surprise he could bring. Haha, the result didn't disappoint me. This child is really not simple. This wasn't him blowing his own trumpet, but the truth. The sword god cultivated Do Chi. Although he borrowed the circulation channels in his body in some aspects, his fighting method was still the same as the other world's fighting philosophy. Simply put, it was big and wide, and with the strength of the sword god, If he completely spread out the power of his Do Chi, one sword strike could cover the mountains and fill the sea. And what Tang Yin was afraid of now was this kind of overwhelming attack because it had nothing to do with skills, calculations, and other factors. It was purely a competition of strength. Just like the battle outside the imperial city in the northern wilderness, when more than 10 experts of the fierce Eagle tribe joined forces to attack the mountain, Tang Yin had no choice but to escape. But when these experts chased after him, Tang An went to them one by one, and the result was that he successfully killed more than half of them. But the sword god didn't do that just now. Instead, he chose to compress his Do Chi infinitely. This was tantamount to binding his hands and feet, using his own shortcomings to face Tang An's advantage. And the result was a miracle. Nodding, Haita couldn't help but breathe a long sigh of relief in his heart, calming his surging emotions. This wasn't to say that he couldn't afford to lose and was jealous of Tang Yin, so he was greatly relieved after learning that there was a hidden story. He was only relieved because he had finally untied the knot in his heart. After all, what Tang Yin did was really frightening. In the case of such a great disparity in strength, he was still able to smoothly catch the sword god's sword. How could they, who had painstakingly cultivated for 100 years and finally become experts, endure this? Thankfully, this world was still normal and could still be understood using common sense. After untying the knot in his heart, Haita couldn't help but ask doubtfully, "In that case, Master, why do you seem to have a lot on your mind all the way here?" Alas! Sighing, Wu Ding tapped his forehead, looking a little distressed. "It's because of that space crack. I didn't expect that Tang Yin had already stepped into the space domain, and so deep. At that time, because of the bet, my compressor intent was completely trapped. After that, although I forcibly closed the space crack, logically speaking, the sword intent should have slowly dissipated into space. But the space power that Tang Yin cultivates is a bit strange. Like the concept of close combat, he can only control the narrow area around him and completely ignore the distance. I'm worried that the sword intent will rush out of the space barrier because of this and come to the world again." Haita was shocked when he heard this. Of course, he knew the power of his master's sword. If it came to the world again and appeared in the sky above a town, the consequences would be unimaginable. Well, it's just a possibility. Having entered the parallel space, Wu Ding couldn't feel where his sword intent was now. He could only comfort his master. Space is as vast as the sea and infinitely mysterious. Not to mention whether the sword intent can come out or not. Even if it comes out, it may not come to this world. So, His voice hadn't finished resounding in the air when Wu Ding's brows raised abruptly, and then he swiftly turned to look towards the west while his expression changed greatly. They really came out. Damn it. After he finished cursing, his figure shook and instantly vanished on the spot under Hai Ta's dumbstruck gaze. It came out? No, it can't be. Hundreds of miles to the west of Coldwater City, in the continuous mountain range. It was originally a deserted place, but now there were dozens of figures running wildly in it, one in front and one behind, as if they were chasing after each other. Damn it, stop. If you run again, I'll kill your whole family. Haha. Kill the rest, but leave that coquettish girl alive. I haven't touched meat for 3 months. Not bad. Not bad. Huh. Little girl, don't run. Why don't you save your strength to have a good time with me? All kinds of filthy words reverberated in the mountain range, and it was extremely vulgar. These words came from the dozens of fierce men behind. If he guessed correctly, they should be the mountain bandits in the north. A few hundred meters ahead, 7 or 8 people were running in a sorry state. In addition to the people in armor who looked like guards, there were 3 figures in plain clothes, a man, a woman, and a child. Judging from their clothes, there was no doubt that they were from wealthy families. In this way, the scene before him could be explained. They were nothing more than a passing caravan, or wealthy families who came to the north to travel, visit relatives, and so on. In the end, they unfortunately encountered bandits in this mountain range, and the situation was critical. The middle-aged man with the sword looked back, gritted his teeth, and shouted at the young woman holding the child beside him. run. Take the child and run quickly. Find a hidden place to hide. You and I will meet the enemy here and block these damned bandits for a moment. I huff. I can't run anymore. You take the child and run. The young woman panted and shouted with a red face. Don't talk nonsense, run. In this situation, if there were no accidents, the end of these people could be imagined. But would there be any accidents? Chapter 870. Run. Don't look back. Run. The hoarse roars echoed in the mountains. It was easy to foresee the tragedy that was about to unfold. Although the middle-aged man and his loyal guards were courageous, it was obvious that they were no match for the bandits behind them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to escape here. Once they were killed, it was easy to imagine the fate of the widows and orphans who were staggering as they fled. In fact, the beautiful young woman didn't manage to escape successfully. When she was close to the peak, she seemed to be frightened. Her feet suddenly stopped, and she fell heavily to the ground. Ah, damn it! The middle-aged man looked back, his eyes full of anxiety and madness. When he turned to look at the ferocious bandits dozens of feet away, his expression was full of despair. He gritted his teeth and waved his sword. Retreat, retreat first. He stayed to fight to the death in order to buy time for his wife and child to escape. Although the chance of success was too small, it was still a glimmer of hope. But now, the beautiful young woman had fallen to the ground with the child. If no one helped her, she wouldn't be able to get up. In this way, there was no point in fighting to the death. In fact, after making this decision, the middle-aged man already knew it was over. They would all die, and so would the child. As for his beautiful wife, the middle-aged man tightened his grip on his sword and ran back with a face full of pain. Forgive me, dear. I can't let you be humiliated. However, before the middle-aged man who had secretly made up his mind could take action, after reaching the peak, he suddenly stopped running and almost fell to the ground like his wife. He cried out involuntarily, "Oh God!" In front of them, it wasn't the gentle slope of the mountain as they had imagined. Instead, it was a dark abyss that was dozens of feet long and bottomless. A few stones were inadvertently kicked down by the guards who were rushing back. After a while, the sound of impact echoed. It was actually a broken peak. "Haha, run, keep running. Coquettish girl, I'm coming." The bandits more than 100 meters behind them slowed down, their faces full of mockery. It was clear that they were very clear about the terrain here, so they had a playful attitude from the start, watching the prey in their hands struggle to survive and then fall into complete despair. Stunned for a moment, the middle-aged man put down his sword and let out a sigh of relief. Then, he calmly helped his wife up and stroked the child's sparse and soft hair. "I'm sorry, I can't protect you this time." Blinking his eyes, this jade-like boy was still young and obviously couldn't understand the current situation. Seeing his father caressing his hair, as usual, he reached out his small hand to touch his father's big hand and grinned. Seeing this, the middle-aged man couldn't help but smile. He tightly hugged his beautiful wife, whose face was pale and was still in fear. He took a breath and whispered in her ear, "My dear, close your eyes later. I'll take care of everything." Looking at the abyss a few steps away, the beautiful young woman's delicate body trembled slightly, but she still nodded heavily. "Yes." Turning around and looking at the loyal guards, the middle-aged man bowed solemnly before waving his hand and saying, "It's my fault for dragging you all into this. These damn bandits' target is us, so let's hurry up and run. There should be a chance. Yes, I won't say anything else. In short, thank you all." Hearing this, the guards looked at each other and fell silent. Nobody wanted to die if they could live, and in this situation, there really wasn't much point in staying. Without waiting for the guards to make a decision, the middle-aged man had already turned around and walked to the edge of the cliff with his wife and child. "Scared? No. I'll kill your whole family. Stop right there. There's a bottomless abyss below, and if you fall, you'll be smashed into a pile of meat paste with no bones left and maggots rotting. Some threatened, some cursed, some intimidated. There were hysterical roars and screams. Seeing the middle-aged man's choice, the bandits suddenly panicked. It was true that they wanted to kill him, but not in such a way where they wouldn't gain anything. Besides, it was fine if you jumped off the cliff, but why did you have to get that coquettish girl involved? The middle-aged man looked back and smiled contemptuously. Then, holding his wife and child, he lowered his head and was about to jump directly into the abyss. No. Damn it. F***CK. Among the crazy and dejected curses, suddenly, there was a burst of crisp laughter. Hee. Bird, big bird. Hee. Hearing this, the middle-aged man was stunned. His feet were suspended in the air, and he turned to look at the little boy in the arms of the young woman with closed eyes. He was holding his mother's shoulder, and his white and tender little arms were trying to point to the sky behind him with an excited smile on his face. Forget it. Let's wait a little longer. I'll let him see the last scenery of the world. Thinking this, the middle-aged man secretly sighed and withdrew his feet. But at this moment, old master, look, there's something in the sky. Hearing the guard's extremely shocked tone, the middle-aged man turned around in shock and squinted at the sky. His expression suddenly froze. There was indeed something in the sky, but it wasn't a bird. Of course, in the eyes of a child, most of the things that could fly in the sky were birds. It was a dazzling golden ball of light, and it was so eye-catching in the clear sky with clouds, thousands of miles of clouds. At first, it was only the size of a bowl, but in a short moment, it changed shape, constantly stretching and expanding and rapidly falling. When it was a certain distance away, the more everyone looked at it, the more familiar it was. Then, an uncertain voice sounded hesitantly. Isn't this a sword? Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but be stunned, and then they understood. The middle-aged man subconsciously looked at the long sword that he had just discarded on the ground, and suddenly raised his head. The front end was sharp, and the back was straight and slender. Wasn't this a sword? This was indeed a sword, a gigantic sword with a dazzling golden radiance. And as it fell rapidly, the body of the sword expanded in the wind, becoming even more majestic, covering the sky and the sun. At the same time, the front end of the blade vibrated faintly with the sound of breaking the sound barrier, like the rolling thunder in the sky. Its power was truly terrifying. This sudden change directly stunned everyone. A mountain bandit raised his head in a daze and unconsciously said in a daze, "Damn it, why does it feel like it's coming for us?" As soon as he finished speaking, all the mountain bandits were shocked and instantly came back to their senses, their expressions suddenly changing greatly. At this moment, they realized that the huge golden sword that was falling straight down, wasn't it coming for this mountain peak? F***CK. Amidst the exclamations, all the mountain bandits were like fierce tigers roaring in the forest, birds and beasts in an instant, instantly breaking into a commotion and fleeing in all directions. Unfortunately, before they could run a few steps, an overwhelming and terrifying pressure suddenly pressed down on them. In an instant, all the mountain bandits felt like ants carrying a mountain on their backs. Their legs went weak, and they all fell to the ground together, unable to raise their heads at all. The few people on a mountain peak didn't notice this scene. As they looked up in a daze, it was as if they were in another world, and they didn't feel this terrifying pressure. They only felt that the huge golden sword was getting closer and closer, closer and closer. The process sounded very complicated, but in fact, from the time they discovered the huge golden sword until now, only a few breaths of time had passed. Finally, the huge golden sword that was falling straight down was completely in front of them, and its target was coincidentally this mountain peak, but its position was slightly off, falling behind the mountain bandits, near the foot of the mountain. The next moment, rumbling, the golden light shone brightly, as if the morning sun was slowly rising from the foot of the mountain. The light was boundless and magnificent. This mountain peak, which occupied a large area, was like withered branches and leaves in the wind and rain, rustling and trembling, and the violent explosions that were like continuous thunder. With a stagger, the few people on the mountain peak fell to the ground together. Fortunately, the first wave of tremors wasn't violent, or the middle-aged man and the others would have been directly thrown into the abyss of the cliff. However, this was only the beginning. At the foot of the mountain, as far as the eye could see, the golden light, the air waves, the dust in the sky, and the giant rocks and ancient trees in the sky instantly mixed together, like a charging army of thousands of soldiers and horses, and also like raging waves in a violent storm, crazily surging toward the top of the mountain peak in a large area. The power was terrifying and shocking, and it was daunting at first sight. In the chaos, no one knew which guard let out a violent roar. Hearing this, the middle-aged man subconsciously hugged his wife and children who were constantly screaming, rolled over, and hid behind a giant rock not far away, pressed his head, and crawled on the ground. Immediately, the sky darkened, the sand and stones flew, and the majestic power of the heavens came crashing down. Looking down from the sky, this broken mountain peak and a large area around it were instantly swallowed up by the gray waves and dust that covered the sky and the sun. Vaguely, one could see the towering mountains swaying, shattering, and collapsing. The enormous rocks and trees on it were in a worse state. Some immediately collapsed, and some jumped into the air by themselves. However, before they could fall, they were directly torn into pieces by the terrifying waves of air and scattered in the air. Immediately, the ground seemed to be unable to satisfy the appetite of this terrifying power. Soon, the billowing air waves and dust rose into the sky, condensing and not dissipating, automatically forming a large group of irregular gray clouds in the sky, covering the sky and the sun and enveloping one side. After a long while, the rumbling of thunder gradually stopped. Then, under the pervasive cold wind in the northern mountain range, the gray clouds in the sky began to slowly disperse, revealing the original clear sky. At the top of the mountain, cough, 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 coughing repeatedly behind a devastated giant rock, a gray figure climbed up from the ground, shook his head, and raised a cloud of dust. Then, without caring about anything else, he quickly dug through the thick layer of dust beside him and dug out a figure, shaking and shouting anxiously, "Madam, madam, cough, cough. I'm fine, I'm fine. Child, where's the child?" Before the voice died away, suddenly, a sharp cry sounded, and it was very sad. However, when it fell into the ears of the two dusty people, it was like the sound of ecstasy. "Master, master, are you all right?" At this time, a few more shouts sounded from the top of the mountain, and then the same dusty figures climbed up from everywhere, patting the dust on their bodies. Needless to say, these were the few loyal guards. After confirming that everyone was there, the middle-aged man couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief, and then walked out from behind the giant rock, subconsciously looking around, and his footsteps suddenly stopped, and he was stunned on the spot. On the left, there was a bottomless abyss that was more than 100 feet wide, which had existed before. However, not far from the right, the gentle slope of the mountain that they had climbed up and the dozens of bandits who had chased after them were all gone, and there was only a bottomless abyss of scorched rock that was more than 100 feet wide. The mountain wind was biting cold, spiraling up from the bottom of the abyss on both sides, and it sounded like the wailing of ghosts and howling of wolves. The few people at the top of the mountain stared blankly at the abyss on the left and then at the abyss on the right. They were stunned to find that they were actually standing on a thin trapezoidal peak, and they couldn't come back to their senses. After a while, the sound of kneeling and the pious and ecstatic cries echoed in the valley. "God bless us! Thank God! Praise God!" Splitting the mountain into an abyss with a single sword, such uncanny workmanship was really beyond the scope of ordinary people's understanding. So they only thought that this was a miracle, and the merciful God couldn't bear to see them suffer misfortune. So he showed his divine power and punished those evil bandits and bandits. But in fact, of course, this was not a miracle. Or rather, even if they wanted to thank God, they should thank the goddess of luck. because they were really lucky enough, and it should be known that the sudden appearance of the giant golden sword didn't have any accuracy, and in the end, it killed the bandits and not them. It was really a matter of luck, because the power of the giant golden sword was only so big. Chapter 871. A week's time passed quickly. No one knew about the shocking movement in the remote mountains. Of course, it was impossible for anyone to know about it. Even if the few survivors who had narrowly escaped death went back and spread the news to attract people to come and see, others would only think that it was a natural formation of the terrain and would not associate it with a sword strike. Well, this was not scientific. In the end, the result of this incident could only be that there were a few more devout believers in the world, and there was another legendary material in the bard's mouths. That was all. Oh yes, there was actually a lot of noise about this incident, but no one knew about it. A week ago, a masked man suddenly descended from the sky in broad daylight and barged into the Guild of Magic in a few cities with his bare hands. He did not stop until he kidnapped a space mage and left. The impact of this incident was not small. After all, the Guild of Magic was not a force to be trifled with. After being slapped in the face, the Guild of Magic was furious and quickly launched an investigation. But in the end, other than knowing that the masked man was very strong, they found nothing else. Although the space mage who was kidnapped did not die, when he came back for investigation, he just spread his hands and said that the masked man asked him to move hundreds of kilometers to the west, and then went around the wilderness for a while, laughed a few times, and then returned to the city with him. After thanking him, they parted amicably. That was the whole process, and nothing else happened. After a few days of chaos, the Guild of Magic had to announce internally that they had met a very strong madman. Yes, that was right. In addition to these things that seemed like a farce, there was also a very serious matter that happened in the north of Bran this week. That was, the situation of the temple, which had been an awkward situation, seemed to be improving recently. This did not mean that the believers had forgiven the temple, but that the news of casualties of the clergy from various places had suddenly disappeared. This was naturally a good thing, especially for the temple. However, the headquarters of the Northern Temple seemed to be unusually low-key at this time. Not only did they not send out a large number of people to settle accounts with the countless warriors who had secretly attacked them, but they also sent out secret experts to deal with them. Instead, they secretly called back the experts who were in charge of various places. It was as if they had accepted their fate. It was also as if they were brewing a thunderstorm. Who knows? The ordinary people did not care about this matter. They only felt that the situation had suddenly calmed down a lot. They no longer heard the horrifying rumors of this church being destroyed and that priest being beheaded. The dark clouds in their hearts suddenly dispersed a lot. Then, they did what they had to do. Of course, as an outsider, the ordinary people did not need to understand. However, if it was a clergyman, such as Sylvia, the impression would be different. In the evening, twilight hung low and the waning moon hung high in the sky. On the roof of a side hall in the north corner of the headquarters of the Northern Divine Palace, Sylvia was half sitting in the shadow of the roof. Her upper body was leaning forward, her right leg was bent, and her hands were crossed on her knees. Her face was hidden behind her arms, and only a pair of clear eyes could be seen. She was in a trance and motionless, like a statue under the moonlight. If one followed her line of sight, it would be the holy light city outside the temple headquarters, which was the place where the faithful believers of the temple gathered spontaneously. Different from the believers and clergymen, Sylvia actually preferred the temple headquarters here in the north, which was the holy light city, compared to the more sacred temple headquarters. She liked the atmosphere here, where clergymen and believers coexisted harmoniously. They were all in each other's sight, praying at sunrise and ringing bells at sunset. It was peaceful and harmonious. It was unlike the temple headquarters in the south, which had built a city of its own. Although it looked more majestic and sacred because of the distance, it always made people feel that it was superior and lacked the atmosphere of life. But now, the place that Sylvia liked and was familiar with very much was somewhat strange and alienated. Under the curtain of night, The buildings of different heights were still there, but there were no more lights like stars in the sky. Instead, there was a large area of empty darkness, and the atmosphere was lonely and dead. These were the believers who had withdrawn in recent months. The continuous scandals of the temple had exhausted the trust and faith of these faithful believers. They did not want to riot violently like the believers in other places, so they could only leave silently to carry out a silent protest. Alas, they sighed softly and passed away with the wind. Sylvia's eyes drooped slightly and withdrew her gaze. She did not want to look at the scenery that she used to like the most. In fact, Sylvia's mood was extremely complicated for the withdrawal of these believers. Since she cleared her grievances and officially returned to the temple, she had been running around with the Puritans. According to the various scandals circulating in the world, she carried out a strict investigation on the clergymen involved. Once the evidence was conclusive, she would immediately send them back to the court of the temple headquarters and deal with them according to the laws of the temple. This was the right approved by the Pope when the Puritans came. It was also a feasible way for Sylvia to solve the current crisis of the temple. The reason was very simple. Those who did meritorious deeds should be rewarded, those who did wrong should be admitted, and those who were guilty should be punished. There is a clear distinction between black and white since ancient times, but there were too many guilty clergymen. After investigation, most of the scandals circulating in the world were true. This undoubtedly hurt the hearts of the believers. So many of them chose to evacuate from the Holy Light City. It was also because of this that their actions were opposed by many bigwigs in the temple, who said that they were the root cause of the turmoil in the temple. But Sylvia clenched her fists and looked determined. She felt that what she did was right. Although there were believers who were heartbroken and left the Holy Light City, some of them chose to stay. However, there were also more and more believers who chose to stay and watch, especially at the trial site. Other than roaring and cursing, there were also cheering. In addition to anger, there was another kind of light in their eyes. That was the light of hope that was ignited because of their actions. Without destruction, there can be no construction. Without destruction, how can there be construction? Sylvia firmly believed that as long as this continued, there would be more and more believers who would reignite their hope in the temple. And the silent darkness in front of them would eventually be covered by the stars and lights again, and there would be laughter and laughter. But it was worth mentioning that in the past week, the trial had been temporarily suspended. Sylvia and the Puritans could not leave the Holy Light City. They were grounded. This order came from the headquarters of the Southern Temple. On the surface, the reason was that something big was about to happen here and could not be disturbed. But the actual reason was because of a letter. Thinking of this, Sylvia curled her lips slightly. Recently, the Northern Temple had called back the masters who were in charge of various places. Of course, it was not a sign that they had resigned themselves to their fate. In fact, in addition to these movements, many masters had come from the south and gathered on the land under her feet, waiting for her. It was all for that letter. If this matter was spread out, that the headquarters of the temple would make a big fuss over an ordinary letter, the world would shake their heads. But after confirming that the owner of the letter was a guy named Tang Yin, they did not care at all. She did not know whether it was because of the importance of a lion hunting a rabbit or because of the fear of seeing an enemy in every bush. Xiao Weian shook her head. She had seen the contents of the letter before. It was very ordinary and simple. It was just an agreement on a time and place, and then Tang Yin would come and talk to the people who had a say here. That was it. It was just an ordinary letter of visit, just like those people who had some status in the world but did not know each other for the first time. In order to show respect to each other, they would first send a letter of visit to be polite. But would that guy be polite to the temple? Sylvia naturally shook her head and denied it. So after hesitating for a while, Sylvia still submitted a proposal to Archbishop Varen with an attitude of being responsible for the temple. She wrote down her assessment of Tang Yin's style of doing things and warned them to be careful of the other party's schemes. It also specifically mentioned that Tang Yin had a portable weapon of mass destruction. However, one day later, Sylvia found her proposal in the place where the temple dealt with discarded official documents. It was untouched. She was ignored. The high-level officials of the temple had a high consensus on the purpose of Tang Un's visit this time. That was, the other party was finally unable to hold on. So this time, there was no doubt that he was here to negotiate. Originally, how many people do you have? How much foundation do you have? Our temple has a huge force all over the brand, and we have a foundation of more than 1,000 years. What do you have to waste time with us? It had to be said that in the past year, the northern temple had been suppressed by Tang In to the point that they were a little demonic. They could not help but feel complacent when they caught an advantage. Fortunately, the consequences of thinking like this were not bad. Sylvia reminded the high-level officials of the temple to be vigilant, and the high-level officials of the temple thought that they had guessed Tang In's purpose and wanted to take the opportunity to kill him directly. The reason was also very high. Talk my ass. You suppressed us so badly, and now you know how to give in? It's too late. Just wait for your death. That was roughly what it meant. But even so, Sylvia was still not optimistic about the temple's move this time. She knew Tang In very well. If he did not have full confidence, how could he take the initiative to show up and obediently send himself into the tiger's mouth? It was more likely that he would come and kill them. What about the previous Void Stage Warrior and Magus? They thought that they could kill Tang In one fell swoop, but in the end, they were completely turned around, and almost all of them were wiped out. Thinking so, Sylvia looked past Holy Light City and into the distance to the north. You should be coming from this direction tomorrow, right? What made you dare to take the initiative to provoke us? She was really curious. I guess you would be here. With a chuckle, a figure jumped onto the roof of the side hall and walked over on the tiles. Sylvia did not look surprised at all and said calmly, "You should be in the main hall for a meeting now, Owens." Although the high-level officials of the temple were very disdainful of Tang In, they were still very interested in how to kill him. So since receiving the news, Varen would gather the masters of the temple every night to discuss countermeasures. Sylvia and Owens, as the two holy head knight commanders of the temple, were naturally invited, but their opinions were completely ignored. They were just there to make up the numbers. Speaking of me, what about you? Owens shrugged. After approaching, he also sat down and leaned against the ridge of the roof. He sighed to waning moon. If it was before, as a genuine holy head knight commander, I would have some weight. But now that I'm with you, Archbishop Varen doesn't like me no matter how he looks at me. Sylvia raised her eyebrows. You can also join them now. You're not me. Archbishop Varen should choose to forgive you. Let's not. Owens hurriedly waved his hand. Fence-sitters and two-faced people are the most unlikable. It's better to walk the same path to the end. Xiao Weian smiled and didn't say anything else. However, Owens came over and looked around as if he was serious. Then, he lowered his voice and said, "Why do you think Twain would suddenly do something so suicidal? Unfortunately, I also want to know." "Really? Don't pretend there's no one here." Sylvia turned her head and looked at Owens, who had a "you tell me secretly, I promise I will never tell anyone" look on his face. She frowned and asked, "Should I know?" "Of course, he didn't kill you several times. Who doesn't know your relationship with Tang In?" I mean, who doesn't know that you and Tang In are very close?" Seeing Sylvia's expression suddenly turn serious, Owen smiled guiltily and changed his words in time. "I don't know," Sylvia said stiffly, then got up and left. "If you really want to know, just ask him tomorrow." "Are you kidding me? Although we've met a few times, I'd be courting death if I went up now." Smacking his lips, Owens looked at Xiao Weian's back and said in a low voice, "Besides, I'm not you." Pausing her footsteps, Sylvia turned around and said calmly, "Can't sleep?" Owens was startled, but after observing Sylvia's expression, he said with relief, "Of course, when I think of the scene that might happen tomorrow." Sylvia waved her hand and interrupted him with a blank expression. "What a coincidence. I can't sleep either. Why don't we go to the training ground and practice? I heard that it's good for sleep." Damn, she heard it. Her hearing is too abnormal. Owens's expression changed instantly. What kind of joke is this? Fighting with Sylvia? How is this a matter of not being able to sleep for one night? It's clearly the rhythm of lying in bed for a month. Dahan waved his hand. About that. I suddenly feel very sleepy. Without waiting for Owens to rack his brains to come up with an excuse, Xiao Weian had already jumped off the roof without looking back. However, her faint voice still floated clearly with the wind. In 5 minutes, I'll be waiting for you at the Easter training ground. If you don't come, I know where your room is. Owens opened his mouth with a dull look on his face. After a while, he slapped himself and said, "Damn it, I'm dead now. Lord God of Light, please come and save me. Otherwise, your most devout believer will go to see you." Chapter 872. The next day, in the morning. There was no need to elaborate on how much preparation the temple had made in secret last night. All that needed to be known was that when the morning sun slowly peeked out from the east, all the residents in Holy Light City had been cleared out by the temple personnel and moved to the other side of the river dozens of miles away. There was a slightly raised slope there. Standing on it, as long as one's eyesight was good enough, one could slightly overlook Holy Light City. And this also showed the confidence of the temple's higher-ups in this battle. Just stand here and watch how we purify that daring, evil heretic directly. The stage had been set, and they were just waiting for that damn person to arrive. However, the other party's speed was really slow. Even when the sun was about to reach the top of their heads, there was still no sign of him coming. On the roof of the side hall, Owens, with a pair of huge panda eyes stretched lazily, gave a long yawn, and then rubbed his eyes. He was obviously a little sleepy. If someone counted next to him, then it should be clear that this was the 55th time he had stretched and yawned, of course. Owens cannot be blamed for this. Because if there was someone like him who didn't sleep the entire night and was in a state of high tension during the battle, then they should also be dispirited like him. Oh, that wasn't necessarily the case. Owens looked with infinite resentment at Sylvia, who was patrolling around and was in high spirits, and secretly cursed. What a pervert. You're still so energetic after fighting all night. If you're so energetic, why don't you find someone else? Why do you keep finding someone you know to trick? What kind of logic is this? He curled his lips. Don't look for someone else. Maybe that Tang was just joking and teasing us. That's right. Suddenly slapping his thigh, Owens quivered and suddenly became energetic. Why didn't I think of this from the beginning? With Tangen's style of doing things, this is really too normal. Sylvia was also stunned when she heard this. She subconsciously wanted to shake her head and deny it. But thinking of Tangen's wretched shamelessness, she could not help but pause and said hesitantly, "It shouldn't be. What if he does?" Owen shrugged. You know, the possibility of that is not small. Sylvia pursed her lips and stopped talking. He then thought of something. He turned around and looked at the residents who had been moved to the other side of the West River. He then looked at the Sacred Hall magicians who were on standby, not far away, and the experts who were sitting cross-legged on the roofs. Finally, he shifted his gaze to the entrance of the main hall. A row of VIPs in bright red robes was waiting quietly. He withdrew his gaze and exchanged a glance with Owens. Both of them had strange looks. If Tang In really didn't come, then there would be a lot of fun. Not daring to imagine the consequences, the two of them tacitly averted their gazes. Neither of them mentioned this topic again. At this time, Sylvia's eyes suddenly narrowed as she looked at an unmanned carriage slowly approaching from the north. Her expression was somewhat solemn. No one knew the exact location of Tang In, but according to the signs of his past activities, the temple could roughly estimate his location. He should be in the north of the temple headquarters. Therefore, the number of temple knights gathered at the northern periphery of Holy Light City was the highest. However, after the 56th yawn, Owen smacked his lips. Don't look at it. How many people can this small carriage hold? It can't be Tang An's carriage. It should be a believer who came to worship. This was a more reasonable guess. Although the temple was in an embarrassing situation where everyone hated it, there were still fanatical believers. Therefore, there were still many believers who came to worship here every day. It was just that compared to the past, it was much less. Sylvia couldn't help but nod slightly when she heard this. Obviously, she agreed with this guess, but her gaze was still fixed on the carriage. It had to be said that Sylvia was probably the most confident and the most fearful person in the entire temple when facing Tang-un. That guy never took the usual route. Even if he came alone, well, it didn't seem that surprising. At the northern periphery of Holy Light City, a group of knights had already rushed out and rushed towards the carriage. This action didn't mean that they had discovered anything. In fact, they didn't think that Tang-un would be in this ordinary carriage. It was just their duty. They needed to stop the believers who entered the city from the periphery and take them to the side, so that they wouldn't be accidentally injured when Tang-un came. In this kind of careless guess, the curtain of the carriage in the distance was lifted, revealing a middle-aged man with a simple and unadorned face. His gaze first paused on the group of knights who were rushing over from afar, and then he looked at the extremely quiet Holy Light City in the distance. After a pause, the corners of his mouth rose slightly, and he put down the curtain. "Little Tang, it seems that the temple really values you this time. Even the Holy Light City, which is said to be unguarded, has been cleared out." In the carriage, the middle-aged man with a simple and unadorned face said lightly, "Haha, it's just an undeserved reputation." On the opposite side, a young man with mediocre facial features, with only a pair of long and narrow eyes that were somewhat recognizable, modestly waved his hand and said something embarrassing. However, the corners of his eyes were flying, and he had a look that said, praise me again." Needless to say, this young man was naturally Tang-un, who had come for the appointment. Indeed, as Sylvia expected, he didn't take the usual route this time. He hired an ordinary carriage and came in a carefree manner. However, he also had the confidence to do so because the middle-aged man with a simple and unadorned face sitting in front of him, he spread his hands and said, "Elder Wu, the show is about to start. You can't be exposed again. This old voice doesn't sound like yours." "Oh, sorry, I'm still not used to it." The middle-aged man rubbed his simple and unadorned face and nodded apologetically. His tone had turned into the slightly magnetic voice of a mature man. "But your disguise is really good. I've lived for so many years, but this is the first time I've seen such a vivid and flawless disguise prop." "Haha, yes, no wonder you can live until now with the temple's wanted list." Elder Wu, of course, was the sword god Wu Ding. After winning the bet, Tang-un found Wu Ding the next day and invited him to visit the northern temple headquarters with him to see the scenery or something. Wu Ding was not surprised when he heard this, nor did he hesitate. He nodded and agreed readily. As a result, this seemingly illogical scene had occurred before their eyes. "Haha, it's just a little trick. It's not presentable." Tang-un listened to the praise from the sword god Wu Ding with a face full of enjoyment, then shrugged. "By the way, to avoid making people think otherwise, I'll have to change the way I address you, Elder Wu." "Well, then I'll add one more. How about I call you Elder Lu?" "No problem. But 5 plus 1, shouldn't it be 6? Oh, 6 doesn't sound good. Elder Lu sounds more comfortable." Tang-un blinked and changed the topic. Then, he took out a yellow-orange gold-threaded broadsword from under the table and handed it over. "Hee, sorry to trouble you, Elder Lu. This is your next weapon." Wu Ding did not look surprised when he took the extremely domineering gold-threaded broadsword. After all, he had to go all the way. He was called the Sword God, so he naturally could not use a sword. However, after looking up and down at the new weapon, Wu Ding looked a little surprised. "Isn't this the weapon used by the bandit leader we met on the way here?" There were many bandits in the north. This was a well-known fact. However, when he thought about the bandits that Wu Ding mentioned, who robbed the leader of the assassin organization and the Sword God brand, he felt a little helpless. "Elder Lu, you have a good memory." With a thumbs up, Tang-un said matter-of-factly, "After thinking about it, I still feel that only this domineering weapon is worthy of Elder Lu's status." Wu Ding glanced at Tang-un. Even the dumbest person could hear the sarcasm in his words. However, after traveling with him for a few days, Wu Ding also saw Tang Un's mischievous personality. He did not take it to heart and just emphasized, "I said earlier that during this trip to the Northern Temple, I won't take the initiative to help you kill people. Of course, you also know that I have long been unhappy with the guys in the temple. Teaching them a lesson is not a problem." "Understood," Tang and rolled his eyes. "But what if someone wants to kill me?" Wu Ding looked at him calmly and said, "No one can hurt you." "All right." Chapter 873. It's done. Although his tone was light, it was naturally an iron law that could not be moved by thousands of mountains when it came from Wu Ding's mouth. Twain nodded and listened to the sound of horse hooves gradually approaching from outside. He turned his hand and picked up a circle of black beard and stuck it to his chin. He rubbed it, and his temperament changed abruptly. He became a burly man with a full beard. Wu Ding could not help but be surprised when he saw this. "You also need to disguise yourself?" "It's a habitual preparation. The rule of an assassin is to ensure that no one can recognize you before you act." Tang picked up a wide-brimmed hat on the table and put it on, slightly covering his narrow eyes that were the only thing that could be recognized. He stood up and spread out his hands. "Of course, this time is different. Originally, with Elder Lu accompanying me, I should be more arrogant. But Elder Lu, you just said that you won't take the initiative to kill people for me. But this time, I really do have someone I must kill, so I have to keep a low profile for the time being. I'll see if I can find that guy first, and then kill him when he least expects it. Haha, I'm a very lazy person. It's best if I can do things simply. Elder Lu, please." He opened the curtain and bowed, making an inviting gesture. Wu Ding shook his head and smiled. Of course, this was not laziness. When one had experience like him, one would know that the future was unpredictable and all kinds of previous plans could never keep up with changes. But did this mean that these prior preparations were useless? Of course not. In fact, with these preparations, one would have the confidence to resist changes. This was also the meaning of the so-called goddess of fate favoring only those who were prepared after thinking about it. Wu Ding stood up. "I'm a little curious. If one day you came to assassinate me, what would you choose to do?" Tang was stunned. You really know how to joke. I think all the assassins in the world would not be stupid enough to target you." "Only if." Seeing Wu Ding's insistence, Tang could only touch his nose. "There are not many ways, but there is one that is foolproof." "Oh." Wu Ding was not shocked when he heard this, nor was he angry because he was looked down upon. He just looked at Tang with interest, waiting for him to continue. He shrugged. "It's very simple. I'll just keep wasting time with you. I'm not sure about other things, but my lifespan should be a little longer than yours." "Well, sorry, I was just saying." Wu Ding paused for a moment, then raised his head and laughed. "Ha! It's nothing. It's the truth. No one can beat time. This is indeed a foolproof method." Tang also chuckled and was about to say something. Suddenly, with a bang, the carriage tilted to one side. Then, the neighing of horses came from outside, and the carriage came to a complete stop. This small movement naturally wouldn't affect the two people in the car, but the laughter just now had stopped. Tang grinned and hammered his palm. "Damn, this broken carriage, it's broken again." Then, he opened the curtain and walked out. This ordinary carriage was indeed ordinary. Tang spent dozens of silver coins to buy it on the road. Then he found two old horses that knew the way, and then let it go on its own. Originally, Tang thought that it would last for a few days, and it should not be a problem to hold on until they reached Holy Light City. Unexpectedly, they really got what they paid for. If there was not a problem with the wheels, then there was a problem with the axle. They had to repair it several times before they finally got here. And this was also the reason why they were late today. Of course, if the people in the temple who were already a little impatient knew the reason, they would probably vomit 3 liters of blood. Jumping out of the carriage, Tang bent down and looked at the completely broken right wheel. He couldn't help but smack his lips. He got up and spread out his hands to Wu Ding, who walked out of the carriage. It's over. This is completely ruined. It's okay. Wu Ding looked up at Holy Light City more than 1,000 feet away with a calm expression. Anyway, we've arrived. Clapping his hands, Tang In stood up. I'm worried about the problem of going back. His words paused, as if he had noticed something. He looked at the center of Holy Light City in the distance, and saw two vague but familiar figures on the roof of a side hall of the temple. He was startled. Oh, this time it's really not my home ground. Even the goddess of luck is not on my side. At such a distance, he naturally wouldn't be noticed if he casually looked at them, but if he stared at them with some kind of strong emotion, it would be different. Wu Ding followed Tang In's gaze and also noticed something. Acquaintances? Kind of. Tang In sighed, and his expression was a little complicated. He waved his hand and said hello. Have you heard of the flower of the Knights of the Temple of Light? Sylvia. Wu Ding raised his eyebrows and nodded. I've heard of her. Recently, she and the Puritans have been doing good things. She's also one of the few people in the temple that I don't dislike. Is she your friend? Tang In honestly spread out his hands. I don't know if she is or not. TSK. The situation is a bit complicated, and I can't explain it clearly in a short time. Oh, in that case, you'd better remind her to be careful. Looking at the approaching night of light, Wu Ding said lightly, what she and the Puritans are doing is right, but right things may not necessarily have a right result. And the Temple of Light is no longer the Temple of Light. The enemies they have to face may not necessarily come from the outside, but are more likely to be the people standing behind them. Wu Ding did not say it explicitly, but Tang In naturally understood. In fact, he knew what Sylvia had done in recent months. In a sense, there was a strange cooperative relationship between them. Tang In kept spreading the scandals of the clergy, while Sylvia investigated and arrested the clergy involved in these scandals. Of course, this did not benefit Tang In, but the Temple of Light suffered more. Yes, what Sylvia and the Puritans did was right, and it also brought hope to many believers to adhere to their faith. But the key was that some people in the Temple of Light headquarters would not think so. First of all, they were not necessarily clean themselves. They would definitely worry that if this continued, they would be found out one day. Moreover, they would also think that if Sylvia and the Puritans did not thoroughly investigate and expose them, and did not make such a big fuss, these things might be fooled, and the believers would not have such a strong reaction. This logic seemed ridiculous, but as someone with vested interests, it was normal for him to have this idea of burying his head in the sand. And with such thoughts, in order to restore the peace of the Temple of Light and for their own safety, they would naturally take measures to deal with Sylvia and the Puritans. And now, these words came out of Wu Ding's mouth, which explained the problem. Shaking his head, Tang In said helplessly, I have reminded her. She should be clear about it, but she insisted. In that case, she is indeed the Flower of Nights. Wu Ding nodded slightly and looked at the roof of the side hall in the distance with appreciation. Who are you? The two knights who dismounted looked at Tang In and Wu Ding. They did not find anything unusual, and their expressions relaxed. This was normal. Although they had definitely seen Tang In's wanted portrait, Tang In had a common face to begin with. Now, with his face full of sideburns and wide-brimmed hat, it was natural that they would not be able to recognize him. Only someone like Xiao Weian, who was extremely familiar with Tang In, would be able to recognize Tang In, who was not putting on a serious disguise. Before Tang In and Wu Ding could answer, the knights saw the carriage that had fallen because of the broken wheels and naturally thought that they were ordinary believers from afar. One of the knights explained the special situation of the Temple of Light, while the other went back to report and called a few more people to move the broken carriage aside. On the roof of the side hall, it's him. It's Tang In. Sylvia unconsciously took a step forward and stepped on a few green roof tiles. She leaned forward as if she did not feel anything. She narrowed her eyes and looked very nervous and solemn. Are you sure? Owens shook his head and looked back and forth several times. He was completely awake. He nodded heavily. He really came, biting her lips, Sylvia's mind was in turmoil. However, before she could fully understand what this meant, a familiar figure suddenly appeared in her line of sight. She was stunned. "That's Reyes?" Owens was also stunned. He suddenly turned his head and squinted at a familiar figure in the large group of knights. His expression changed a few times, and he subconsciously murmured, "Isn't that right? Damn it, there's so many directions, and we still coincidentally bump into each other." Old Reiser, this is the God of Light. He really wants to see you. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.